Hi, welcome back to Storytime. So this is something new that I've been trying. This guy right here, the meowing cat, Maestro, I'm going to have him up when I am speaking between chapters or chatting with chat between chapters or, for, kind of the little before and after stream talking tos. So if you're watching on YouTube and you don't like to listen to the chat, just keep a lookout for him, and when he goes away, that is when I'll be reading the chapters, and then when he appears again, that is when I'll be chatting again. And if you do like to listen to the chat, just go ahead and listen. So today and next week's story time for the Emerald City of Oz might go a little long because it looks like it's about 125 pages in this book. We'll see. Because it was either that or do 2 regular length streams and then 1 pretty short stream. And I don't like to do short story time streams. Anyways, taking a sip and let Maestro disappear. We will get started. So we're reading The Emerald City of Oz. Chapter 1. How the Gnome King Became Angry. The Gnome King was in an angry mood, and at such times he was very disagreeable. Everyone kept away from him, even his chief steward, Calico. Therefore the king stormed and raved all by himself, walking up and down in his jewel-studded cavern and getting angrier all the time. Then he remembered that it was no fun being angry unless he had someone to frighten and make miserable, and he rushed to his big gong and made it clatter as loud as he could. In came the chief steward, trying not to show the Gnome King how frightened he was. "Send the chief counselor here," shouted the angry monarch. Calico ran out as fast as his spindle legs could carry his fat round body, and soon the chief counselor entered the cavern. The king scowled and said to him, "I'm in great trouble over the loss of my magic belt. Every little while I want to do something magical, and I find I can't because the belt is gone. That makes me angry, and when I'm angry I can't have a good time. Now, what do you advise?" "Some people," said the chief counselor, "enjoy getting angry." "But not all the time," declared the king. "To be angry once in a while is really good fun because it makes others so miserable. But to be angry morning, noon, and night, as I am, grows monotonous and prevents my gaining any other pleasure in life. Now, what do you advise?" "Why, if you are angry because you want to do magical things and can't, and if you don't want to get angry at all, my advice is not to want to do magical things." Hearing this, the king glared at his counselor with a furious expression and tugged at his own long white whiskers until he pulled them so hard that he yelled with pain. "You're a fool!" he exclaimed. "I share that honor with your majesty," said the chief counselor. The king roared with rage and stamped his feet. "Ho there, my guards!" he cried. Ho is a royal way of saying come here. So when the guards had hoed, the king said to them, "Take this chief counselor and throw him away." Then the guards took the chief counselor and bound him with chains to prevent his struggling, and threw him away, and the king paced up and down his cavern more angry than before. Finally he rushed to his big gong and made it clatter like a fire alarm. Calico appeared again, trembling and white with fear. "Fetch my pipe!" yelled the king. "Your pipe is already here, your majesty," replied Calico. "Then get my tobacco!" roared the king. "The tobacco is in your pipe, your majesty," returned the steward. "Then bring a live coal from the furnace," commanded the king. "The tobacco is lighted, and your majesty is already smoking your pipe," answered the steward. "Why, so I am," said the king, who had forgotten this fact, "but you are very rude to remind me of it." "I am a low-born, miserable villain," declared the chief steward humbly. The Gnome King could think of nothing to say next, so he puffed away at his pipe and paced up and down the room. Finally, he remembered how angry he was, and cried out, "What do you mean, Calico, by being so contented when your monarch is unhappy?" "What makes you unhappy?" asked the steward. "I've lost my magic belt. A little girl named Dorothy, who was here with Ozma of Oz, stole my belt and carried it away with her," said the king, grinding his teeth with rage. "She captured it in a fair fight," Calico ventured to say, "but I want it! I must have it! Half my power is gone with that belt!" roared the king. "You will have to go to the Land of Oz to recover it, and your Majesty can't get to the Land of Oz in any possible way," said the steward, yawning because he had been on duty 96 hours and was sleepy. "Why not?" asked the king. "Because there is a deadly desert all around that fairy country, which no one is able to cross. You know that fact as well as I do, your Majesty. Never mind the lost belt, you have plenty of power left, for you rule this underground kingdom like a tyrant, and thousands of gnomes obey your commands. I advise you to drink a glass of melted silver to quiet your nerves, and then go to bed." The king grabbed a big ruby and threw it at Calico's head. The steward ducked to escape the heavy jewel, which crashed against the door just over his left ear. "Get out of my sight! Vanish! Go away! And send General Blug here!" screamed the Gnome King. Calico hastily withdrew, and the Gnome King stamped up and down until the general of his armies appeared. This gnome was known far and wide as a terrible fighter and a cruel, desperate commander. He had 50,000 gnome soldiers, all well drilled, who feared nothing but their stern master. Yet General Blug was a trifle uneasy when he arrived and saw how angry the Gnome King was. "Ha! So you're here!" cried the king. "So I am," said the general. "March your army at once to the Land of Oz, capture and destroy the Emerald City, and bring back to me my magic belt," roared the king. "You're crazy," calmly remarked the general. "What's that? What's that? What's that?" And the Gnome King danced around on his pointed toes. He was so enraged. "You don't know what you're talking about," continued the general, seating himself upon a large cut diamond. "I advise you to stand in a corner and count 60 before you speak again. By that time you may be more sensible." The king looked around for something to throw at General Blug, but as nothing was handy, he began to consider that perhaps the man was right, and he had been talking foolishly. So he merely threw himself into his glittering throne, and tipped his crown over his ear, and curled his feet up under him, and glared wickedly at Blug. "In the first place," said the general, "you cannot march across the deadly desert to the Land of Oz, and, if we could, the ruler of that country, Princess Ozma, has certain fairy powers that would render my army helpless. Had you not lost your magic belt, we might have some chance of defeating Ozma, but the belt is gone." "I want it!" screamed the king. "I must have it!" "Well, then, let us try in a sensible way to get it," replied the general. "The belt was captured by a little girl named Dorothy, who lives in Kansas in the United States of America." "But she left it in the Emerald City with Ozma," declared the king. "How do you know that?" asked the general. "One of my spies, who is a blackbird, flew over the desert to the Land of Oz and saw the magic belt in Ozma's palace," replied the king with a groan. "Now that gives me an idea," said General Blug thoughtfully. "There are 2 ways to get to the Land of Oz without traveling across the sandy desert." "What are they?" demanded the king eagerly. "One way is over the desert through the air, and the other way is under the desert through the earth." Hearing this, the Gnome King uttered a yell of joy and leaped from his throne to resume his wild walk up and down the cavern. "That's it, Blug," he shouted. "That's the idea! General! I'm king of the underworld, and my subjects are all miners. I'll make a secret tunnel under the desert to the Land of Oz. Yes! Right up to the Emerald City, and you will march your armies there and capture the whole country." "Softly, softly, your Majesty. Don't go too fast," warned the general. "My gnomes are good fighters, but they are not strong enough to conquer the Emerald City." "Are you sure?" asked the king. Absolutely certain, your majesty. Then what am I to do? Give up the idea and mind your own business, advised the general. You have plenty to do trying to rule your underground kingdom. But I want the magic belt, and I'm going to have it, roared the Gnome King. I'd like to see you get it, replied the general, laughing maliciously. The king was by this time so exasperated that he picked up his scepter, which had a heavy ball, made from a sapphire at the end of it, and threw it with all his force at General Blug. The sapphire hit the general upon his forehead and knocked him flat upon the ground, where he lay motionless. Then the king rang his gong and told the guards to drag out the general and throw him away, which they did. This Gnome King was named Roquat the Red, and no one loved him. He was a bad man and a powerful monarch, and he had resolved to destroy the land of Oz and its magnificent Emerald City, to enslave Princess Ozma and little Dorothy and all of the Oz people, and recover his magic belt. This same belt had once enabled Roquat the Red to carry out so many wicked plans, but that was before Ozma and her people marched to the underground cavern and captured it. The Gnome King could not forgive Dorothy or Princess Ozma, and he had determined to be revenged upon them. But they, for their part, did not know they had so dangerous an enemy. Indeed, Ozma and Dorothy had both almost forgotten that such a person as the Gnome King yet lived under the mountains of the land of Ev, which lay just across the deadly desert to the south of the land of Oz. An unsuspected enemy is doubly dangerous. Sorry about the raspiness of my voice. This has been a bad year for allergies. Chapter 2. How Uncle Henry Got into Trouble. Dorothy Gale lived on a farm in Kansas with her Aunt Em and her Uncle Henry. It was not a big farm, nor a very good one, because sometimes the rain did not come when the crops needed it, and then everything withered and dried up. Once a cyclone had carried away Uncle Henry's house, so that he was obliged to build another, and as he was a poor man, he had to mortgage his farm to get the money to pay for the new house. Then his health became bad, and he was too feeble to work. The doctor ordered him to take a sea voyage, and he went to Australia and took Dorothy with him. That cost a lot of money, too. Uncle Henry grew poorer every year, and the crops raised on the farm only bought food for the family. Therefore, the mortgage could not be paid. At last the banker who had loaned him the money said that if he did not pay on a certain day, his farm would be taken away from him. This worried Uncle Henry a good deal, for without the farm he would have no way to earn a living. He was a good man, and worked in the field as hard as he could, and Aunt Em did all the housework with Dorothy's help, yet they did not seem to get along. This little girl, Dorothy, was like dozens of little girls you know. She was loving and usually sweet-tempered, and had a round, rosy face and earnest eyes. Life was a serious thing to Dorothy, and a wonderful thing, for she had encountered more strange adventures in her short life than many other girls her age. Aunt Em once said she thought that the fairies must have marked Dorothy at her birth, because she had wandered into strange places, and had always been protected by some unseen power. As for Uncle Henry, he thought his little niece merely a dreamer, as her dead mother had been, for he could not quite believe all the curious stories Dorothy told them of the land of Oz, which she had several times visited. He did not think that she tried to deceive her aunt and uncle, but he imagined that she had dreamed all of those astonishing adventures, and that the dreams had been so real to her that she had come to believe them true. Whatever the explanation might be, it was certain that Dorothy had been absent from her Kansas home for several long periods, always disappearing unexpectedly, yet always coming back safe and sound, with amazing tales of where she had been and the unusual people she had met. Her uncle and aunt listened to her stories eagerly, and in spite of their doubts, began to feel that the little girl had gained a lot of experience and wisdom that were unaccountable in this age, when fairies were supposed to no longer exist. Most of Dorothy's stories were about the land of Oz, with its beautiful emerald city and a lovely girl ruler named Ozma, who was the most faithful friend of the little Kansas girl. When Dorothy told about the riches of this fairy country, Uncle Henry would sigh, for he knew that a single one of the great emeralds that were so common there would pay all his debts and leave him his farm free. But Dorothy never brought any jewels home with her, so their poverty became greater every year. When the banker told Uncle Henry that he must pay the money in 30 days or leave the farm, the poor man was in despair, as he knew he could not possibly get the money. So he told his wife, Aunt Em, of his trouble, and she first cried a little, and then she said that they must be brave and do the best they could and go away somewhere and try to earn an honest living. But they were getting old and feeble, and she feared that they could not take care of Dorothy as well as they had formerly done. Probably the little girl would also be obliged to go to work. They did not tell their niece the sad news for several days, not wishing to make her unhappy, but one morning the little girl found Aunt Em softly crying, while Uncle Henry tried to comfort her. Then Dorothy asked them to tell her what was the matter. "We must give up the farm, my dear," replied her uncle sadly, "and wander away into the world to work for our living." The girl listened quite seriously, for she had not known before how desperately poor they were. "We don't mind for ourselves," said her aunt, stroking the little girl's head tenderly, "but we love you as if you were our own child, and we are heartbroken to think that you must also endure poverty and work for a living before you have grown big and strong." "What could I do to earn money?" asked Dorothy. "You might do housework for someone, dear, or you are so handy. Or perhaps you could be a nursemaid to little children. I'm sure I don't know exactly what you can do to earn money, but if your uncle and I are able to support you, we will do it willingly and send you to school. We fear, though, that we shall have much trouble in earning a living for ourselves. No one wants to employ old people who are broken down in health as we are." Dorothy smiled. "Wouldn't it be funny," she said, "for me to do housework in Kansas when I'm a princess in the land of Oz?" "A princess!" they both exclaimed, astonished. "Yes, Ozma made me a princess some time ago, and she has often begged me to come and live always in the Emerald City," said the child. Her uncle and aunt looked at her in amazement. Then the man said, "Do you suppose you can manage to return to your fairy land, my dear?" "Oh, yes," replied Dorothy. "I could do that easily." "How?" asked Aunt Em. "Ozma sees me every day at 4 o'clock in her magic picture, and she sees me wherever I am, no matter what I am doing. And at that time, if I make a certain secret sign, she will send for me by means of the magic belt, which I once captured from the Gnome King. Then, in the wink of an eye, I shall be with Ozma in her palace." The older people remained silent for some time after Dorothy had spoken. Finally, Aunt Em said, with another sigh of regret, "If that is the case, Dorothy, perhaps you'd better go and live in the Emerald City. It will break our hearts to lose you from our lives, but you will be so much better off with your fairy friends that it seems wisest and best for you to go." "I'm not so sure about that," remarked Uncle Henry, shaking his gray head doubtfully. "These things all seem real to Dorothy, I know, but I'm afraid our little girl won't find her fairyland just what she has dreamed it would be. Just what she had dreamed it to be. It would make me very unhappy to think that she has wandered among strangers who might be unkind to her." Dorothy laughed merrily at his speech, and then she became very sober again, for she could see how all this trouble was worrying her aunt and uncle, and knew that unless she found a way to help them, their future lives would be quite miserable and unhappy. She knew that she could help them. She had thought of a way already, yet she did not tell them at once what it is, because she must ask Ozma's consent before she would be able to carry out her plans. So she only said, "If you will promise not to worry a bit more about me, I'll go to the Land of Oz this very afternoon. And I'll make a promise, too, that you shall both see me again before the day comes when you must leave this farm." "The day isn't far away now," said her uncle sadly. "I did not tell you of our trouble until I was obliged to, dear Dorothy. So the evil time is near at hand. But if you are quite sure your fairy friends will give you a home, it will be best for you to go to them, as your aunt says." That was why Dorothy went to her little room in the attic that afternoon, taking with her a small dog named Toto. The dog had curly black hair and big brown eyes and loved Dorothy very dearly. The child had kissed her uncle and aunt affectionately before she went upstairs, and now she looked around her little room, rather wistfully, gazing at the simple trinkets and worn calico and gingham dresses as if they were old friends. She was tempted at first to make a bundle of them, yet she knew very well that they would be of no use to her in her future life. She sat down upon a broken-backed chair, the only one the room contained, and holding Toto in her arms, waited patiently until the clock struck 4. Then she made the secret signal that had been agreed upon between her and Ozma. Uncle Henry and Aunt Em waited downstairs. They were uneasy and a good deal excited, for this is a particular humdrum world, and it seemed to them quite impossible that their little niece could vanish from her home and travel instantly to Fairyland. So they watched the stairs, which seemed to be the only way that Dorothy could get out of the farmhouse, and they watched them a long time. They heard the clock strike 4, but there was no sound from above. 4:30 came, and now they were too impatient to wait any longer. Softly they crept up the stairs to the door of the little girl's room. "Dorothy! Dorothy!" they called. There was no answer. They opened the door and looked in. The room was empty. Chapter 3. How Ozma Granted Dorothy's Request. I suppose you have read so much about the magnificent Emerald City that there is little need for me to describe it here. It is the capital city of the Land of Oz, which is justly considered the most attractive and delightful fairyland in all the world. The Emerald City is built all of beautiful marbles, in which are set a profusion of emeralds, every one exquisitely cut and of very great size. There are other jewels used in the decorations inside the houses and palaces, such as rubies, diamonds, sapphires, amethysts, and turquoise. But in the streets and upon the outside of the buildings, only emeralds appear, from which circumstance the palace is named the Emerald City of Oz. It has 9,654 buildings, in which lived 57,318 people up to the time my story opens. All the surrounding country, extending to the borders of the desert, which enclosed it upon every side, was full of pretty and comfortable farmhouses, in which resided those inhabitants of Oz who preferred country to city life. Although there were more than 500,000 people in the Land of Oz, although some of them, as you will soon learn, were not made of flesh and blood as we are, and every inhabitant of that favored country was happy and prosperous. No disease of any sort was ever known among the Ozites, and so no one ever died unless he met with an accident that prevented him from living. This happened very seldom indeed. There were no poor people in the Land of Oz because there was no such thing as money, and all property of every sort belonged to the ruler. The people were her children, and she cared for them. Each person was given freely by his neighbors whatever he required for his use, which is as much as anyone may reasonably desire. Some tilled the land and raised great crops of grain, which was divided equally among the entire population so that all had enough. There were many tailors and dressmakers and shoemakers and the like, who made things that any who desired them might wear. Likewise, there were jewelers who made ornaments for the person, which pleased and beautified the people, and these ornaments also were free to those who asked for them. Each man and woman, no matter what he or she produced for the good of the community, was supplied by the neighbors with food and clothing, and a house and furniture and ornaments and games. If by chance the supply ever ran short, more was taken from the great storehouses of the ruler, which were afterward filled up again when there was more of any article than the people needed. Everyone worked half the time and played half the time, and the people enjoyed the work as much as they did the play, because it is good to be occupied and to have something to do. There were no cruel overseers set to watch them, and no one to rebuke them or to find fault with them. So each one was proud to do all he could for his friends and neighbors, and was glad when they would accept the things he produced. You will know, by what I have told you here, that the land of Oz was a remarkable country. I do not suppose such an arrangement would be practical with us, but Dorothy assures me that it works finely with the Oz people. It's interesting, kind of break the fourth wall, that Dorothy has talked with the narrator. Oz being a fairy country, the people were, of course, fairy people, but that does not mean that all of them were very unlike the people of our own world. There were all sorts of queer characters among them, but not a single one who was evil, or who possessed a selfish or violent nature. They were peaceful, kind-hearted, loving, and merry, and every inhabitant adored the beautiful girl who ruled them, and delighted to obey her every command. In spite of all I have said in a general way, there were some parts of the land of Oz not quite so pleasant as the farming country in the Emerald City, which was its center. Far away in the South Country there lived in the mountains a band of strange people called Hammerheads, because they had no arms and used their flat heads to pound everyone who came near them. Their necks were like rubber, so that they could shoot out their heads to quite a distance, and afterwards draw them back again to their shoulders. The Hammerheads were called the Wild People, but never harmed any but those who disturbed them in the mountains where they lived. In some of the dense forests there lived great beasts of every sort, yet these were for the most part harmless and even sociable, and conversed agreeably with those who visited their haunts. The Kalidas, beasts with bodies like bears and heads like tigers, had once been fierce and bloodthirsty, but even they were now really nearly all tamed, although at times one or another of them would get cross and disagreeable. Not so tame were the Fighting Trees, which had a forest of their own. If anyone approached them, these curious trees would bend down their branches, twine them around the intruders, and hurl them away. But these unpleasant things existed only in a few remote parts of the land of Oz. I suppose every country has some drawbacks, so even this almost perfect fairyland could not be quite perfect. Once there had been wicked witches in the land, too, but now these all had been destroyed. So, as I said, only peace and happiness reigned in Oz. For some time, Ozma had ruled over this fairy country, and never was ruler more popular or beloved. She is said to be the most beautiful girl the world has ever known, and her heart and mind are as lovely as her person. Dorothy Gale had several times visited the Emerald City and experienced adventures in the land of Oz, so that she and Ozma had now become firm friends. The girl ruler had even made Dorothy a princess of Oz, and had often implored her to come to Ozma's stately palace and live there always. But Dorothy had been loyal to her Aunt Em and Uncle Henry, who had cared for her since she was a baby, and she had refused to leave them because she knew they would be lonely without her. However, Dorothy now realized that things were going to be different with her uncle and aunt from this time forth, so after giving the matter deep thought, she decided to ask Ozma to grant her a very great favor. A few seconds after she had made the secret signal in her little bedchamber, the Kansas girl was seated in a lovely room in Ozma's palace in the Emerald City of Oz. When the first loving kisses and embraces had been exchanged, the fair ruler inquired, "What is the matter, dear? I know something unpleasant has happened to you, for your face was very sober when I saw it in my magic picture. And whenever you signaled me to transport you to this safe place, where you are always welcome, I know you are in danger or in trouble." Dorothy sighed. "This time, Ozma, it isn't me," she replied. "But it's worse, I guess, for Uncle Henry and Aunt Em are in a heap of trouble, and there seems no way for them to get out of it, anyhow not while they live in Kansas." "Tell me about it, Dorothy," said Ozma with ready sympathy. "Why, you see, Uncle Henry is poor, for the farm in Kansas doesn't amount to much as farms go. So one day Uncle Henry borrowed some money and wrote a letter saying that if he didn't pay the money back, they would take his farm for pay. Of course, he expected to pay by making money from the farm, but he just couldn't. And so they're going to take the farm, and Uncle Henry and Aunt Em won't have any place to live. They're pretty old to do such hard work, Ozma, so I'll have to work for them unless—" Ozma had been thoughtful during the story, but now she smiled and pressed her little friend's hands. "Unless what, dear?" she asked. Dorothy hesitated because her request meant so much to them all. "Well," she said, "I'd like to live here in the Land of Oz, where you've often invited me to live, but I can't, you know, unless Uncle Henry and Aunt Em could live here too." "Of course not," exclaimed the ruler of Oz, laughing gaily. "So in order to get you, little friend, we must invite your uncle and aunt to live in Oz also." "Oh, will you, Ozma?" cried Dorothy, clasping her chubby little hands eagerly. "Will you bring them here with the magic belt and give them a nice little farm in the Munchkin country or the Winkie country or some other place?" "To be sure," answered Ozma, full of joy at the chance to please her little friend. "I have long been thinking of this very thing, Dorothy dear, and often I had it in my mind to propose it to you. I'm sure your uncle and aunt must be good and worthy people, or you would not love them so much. And for your friends, Princess, there is always room in the Land of Oz." "Hey, Corel, good to see you." Dorothy was delighted, yet not altogether surprised, for she had clung to the hope that Ozma would be kind enough to grant her request, when indeed had her powerful and faithful friend refused her anything. "But you must not call me Princess," she said, "for after this I shall live on the little farm with Uncle Henry and Aunt Em, and princesses ought not to live on farms." "Princess Dorothy will not," replied Ozma with her sweet smile. "You are going to live in your own rooms in this palace and be my constant companion." "But Uncle Henry," began Dorothy. "Oh, he is old, and has worked enough in his lifetime," interrupted the girl ruler. "So we must find a place for your uncle and aunt where they will be comfortable and happy, and need not work more than they care to. When shall we transport them here, Dorothy?" "I promised to go and see them again before they were turned I promised to go and see them again before they were turned out of the farmhouse," answered Dorothy. So perhaps next Saturday." "But why wait so long?" asked Ozma. "And why make the journey back to Kansas again? Let us surprise them and bring them here without any warning." "I'm not sure that they believe in the Land of Oz," said Dorothy, "though I've told them about it lots of times." "They'll believe when they see it," declared Ozma, "and if they are told they are to make a magical journey to our fairyland, it might make them nervous. I think the best way will be to use the magic belt without warning them, and when they have arrived, you can explain to them whatever they do not understand." "Perhaps that's best," decided Dorothy. "There isn't much use in staying at the farm until they are put out, 'cause it's much nicer here." "Then tomorrow morning they shall come here," said Princess Ozma. "I will order Jellia Jam, who is the palace housekeeper, to have rooms all prepared for them, and after breakfast we will get the magic belt, and by its aid transport your aunt and uncle to Emerald City." "Thank you, Ozma," cried Dorothy, kissing her friend gratefully. "And now," Ozma proposed, "let us take a walk in the garden before we dress for dinner. Come, Dorothy dear." Chapter 4. How the Gnome King Planned Revenge. The reason most people are bad is because they do not try to be good. Now the Gnome King had never tried to be good, so he was very bad indeed. Having decided to conquer the land of Oz and to destroy the Emerald City and enslave all its people, King Rolcot the Red kept planning ways to do this dreadful thing, and the more he planned, the more he believed he would be able to accomplish it. About the time Dorothy went to Ozma, the Gnome King called his chief steward to him and said, "Calico, I think I shall make you the general of my armies." "I think you won't," replied Calico positively. "Why not?" inquired the king, reaching for his scepter with the big sapphire. "Because I am your chief steward and know nothing of warfare," said Calico, preparing to dodge if anything were thrown at him. "I manage all the affairs of your kingdom better than you could yourself, and you'll never find another steward as good as I am. But there are 100 gnomes better fitted to command your army, and your generals get thrown away so often that I have no desire to be one of them." "Ah, there is some truth in your remarks, Calico," remarked the king, deciding not to throw the scepter. "Summon my army to assemble in the great cavern." Calico bowed and retired, and in a few minutes returned to say that the army was assembled. So the king went out upon a balcony that overlooked the great caverns, where 50,000 gnomes, all armed with swords and pikes, stood marshaled in military array. When they were not required as soldiers, all these gnomes were metal workers and miners, and they had hammered so much at the forges and dug so hard with pick and shovel that they had acquired great muscular strength. They were strangely formed creatures, rather round and not very tall. Their toes were curly, and their ears broad and flat. In time of war, every gnome left his forge or mine, and became part of the great army of King Rolcot. The soldiers wore rock-colored uniforms, and were excellently drilled. The king looked upon his tremendous army, which stood silently arrayed before him, and a cruel smile curled the corners of his mouth, for he saw that his legions were very powerful. Then he addressed them from the balcony, saying, "I have thrown away General Blug because he did not please me, so I want another general to command this army. Who is next in command?" "I am," replied Corporal Crinkle, a dapper-looking gnome, as he stepped forward to salute his monarch. The king looked at him carefully and said, "I want you to march this army through an underground tunnel which I am going to bore, to the Emerald City of Oz. When you get there, I want you to conquer the Oz people, destroy them and their city, and bring all their gold and silver and precious stones back to my cavern. Also, you are to recapture my magic belt and return it to me. Will you do this, General Crinkle?" "No, your majesty," replied the gnome, "for it can't be done." "Oh, indeed!" exclaimed the king. Then he turned to his servants and said, "Please take General Crinkle to the torture chamber. There you will kindly slice him into thin slices. Afterwards you can feed him to the 7-headed dogs." "Anything to oblige your majesty," replied the servants politely, and led the condemned man away. When they had gone, the king addressed the army again. "Listen," said he. "The general who is in command of my army must promise to carry out my orders. If he fails, he will share the fate of poor Crinkle. Now then, who will volunteer to lead my hosts to the Emerald City?" For a time no one moved, and all were silent. There was an old gnome with white whiskers so long that they were tied round his waist to prevent their tripping him up, stepped out of the ranks and saluted the king. "I'd like to ask a few questions, your majesty," he said. "Go ahead," replied the king. "These Oz people are quite good, are they not?" "As good as apple pie," said the king. "And they are happy, I suppose?" continued the old gnome. "Happy as the day is long," said the king. "And contented and prosperous?" inquired the gnome. "Very much so," said the king. "Well, your majesty," remarked he of the white whiskers, "I think I should like to undertake the job, so I'll be your general. I hate good people. I detest happy people. I'm opposed to anyone who is contented and prosperous. This is why I'm so fond of your majesty. Make me your general, and I'll promise to conquer and destroy the Oz people. If I fail, I'm ready to be sliced thin and fed to the 7-headed dogs." "Very good. Very good indeed. That's the way to talk," cried Rokat the Red, who was greatly pleased. "What is your name, General?" "I'm called Guff, your majesty." "Well, Guff, come with me to my private cave and we'll talk it over." Then he turned to the army. "Gnomes and soldiers," said he, "you are to obey the commands of General Guff until he becomes dog feed. Any man who fails to obey his new general will be promptly thrown away. You are now dismissed." Guff went to the king's private cave and sat down upon an amethyst chair and put his feet on the arms of the king's ruby throne. Then he lighted his pipe and threw the live coal he had taken from his pocket upon the king's left foot and puffed the smoke into the king's eyes and made himself comfortable. For he was a wise old gnome, and he knew that the best way to get along with Rokat the Red was to show that he was not afraid of him. "I'm ready for the talk, your majesty," he said. The king coughed and looked at his new general fiercely. "Do you not tremble to take such liberties with your monarch?" he asked. "Oh, no," replied Guff calmly, and he blew a wreath of smoke that curled around the king's nose and made him sneeze. "You want to conquer the Emerald City, and I am the only gnome in all your dominions who can conquer it. So you will be very careful not to hurt me until I have carried out your wishes. After that, well, what then?" inquired the king. "Well, then you will be so grateful to me that you won't care to hurt me," replied the general. "That is a very good argument," said Rokat. "But suppose you fail?" "Then it's the slicer machine. I agreed to that," announced Guff. "But if you do as I tell you, there will be no failure. The trouble with you, Rokat, is that you don't think carefully enough. I do. You would go ahead and march through your tunnel into Oz and get defeated and driven back. I won't. And the reason I won't is because when I march, I'll have all my plans made and a host of allies to assist my gnomes." "What do you mean by that?" asked the king. "I'll explain, King Rokat. You're going to attack a fairy country, and a mighty fairy country, too. They haven't much of an army in Oz, but the princess who rules them has a fairy wand, and the little girl Dorothy has your magic belt, and at the north of the Emerald City lives a clever sorceress named Glinda the Good, who commands the spirits of the air. Also, I have heard that there is a wonderful wizard in Ozma's palace who is so skillful that people used to pay him money in America to see him perform. So you see, it will be no easy thing to overcome all this magic." "We have 50,000 soldiers," cried the king proudly. "Yes, but they are gnomes," remarked Guff, taking a silk handkerchief from the king's pocket and wiping his own pointed shoes with it. "Gnomes are immortals, but they are not strong on magic. When you lost your famous belt, the greater part of your own power was gone from you. Against Ozma, you and your gnomes would have no show at all." Rokat's eyes flashed angrily. "Then away you go to the slicing machine," he cried. "Not yet," said the general, filling his pipe from the king's private tobacco pouch. "What do you propose to do?" asked the monarch. "I propose to obtain the power we need," answered Guff. "There are a good many evil creatures who have magic powers sufficient to destroy and conquer the land of Oz. We will get them on our side, band them all together, and then take Ozma and her people by surprise. It's all very simple and easy when you know how. Alone, we should be helpless to injure the ruler of Oz, but with the aid of the evil powers we can summon, we shall easily succeed." King Rokat was delighted with this idea, for he realized how clever it was. "Surely, Guff, you are the greatest general I have ever had!" he exclaimed, his eyes sparkling with joy. "You must go at once and make the arrangements with the evil powers to assist us, and meantime I'll begin to dig the tunnel." "I thought you'd agree with me, Rokat," replied the new general. "I'll start this very afternoon to visit the chief of the Whimsies." Chapter 5. How Dorothy Became a Princess. When the people of the Emerald City heard that Dorothy had returned to them, everyone was eager to see her, for the little girl was a general favorite in the land of Oz. From time to time, some of the folks from the great outside world had found their way into this fairyland, but all except one had been companions of Dorothy and had turned out to be very agreeable people. The exception I speak of was the wonderful Wizard of Oz, a sleight-of-hand performer from Omaha, who went up in a balloon and was carried by a current of air to the Emerald City. His queer and puzzling tricks made the people of Oz believe him a great wizard for a time, and he ruled over them until Dorothy arrived on her first visit and showed the wizard to be a mere humbug. He was a gentle, kindly-hearted little man, and Dorothy grew to like him afterward. When, after an absence, the wizard returned to the land of Oz, Ozma received him graciously and gave him a home in a part of the palace. In addition to the wizard, 2 other personages from the outside world had been allowed to make their home in the Emerald City. The first was a quaint, shaggy man who Ozma had made the governor of the royal storehouses, and the second a yellow hen named Billina, who had a fine house in the gardens back of the palace, where she looked after a large family. Both these had been old comrades to Dorothy, so you see the little girl was quite an important personage in Oz, and the people thought she had brought them good luck, and loved her next best to Ozma. During her several visits, this little girl had been the means of destroying 2 wicked witches who oppressed the people, and she had discovered a live scarecrow who was now one of the most popular personages in all of the fairy country. With the scarecrow's help, she had rescued Nick Chopper, a Tin Woodman, who had rusted in a lonely forest, and the Tin Man was now the emperor of the country of the Winkies, and much beloved because of his kind heart. No wonder the people thought Dorothy had brought them good luck. Yet, strange as it may seem, she had accomplished all these wonders not because she was a fairy or had any magical powers whatever, but because she was a simple, sweet, and true little girl who was honest to herself and to all whom she met. In this world in which we live, simplicity and kindness are the only magic wands that work wonders. And in the land of Oz, Dorothy found these same qualities had won her the love and admiration of the people. Indeed, the little girl had made many warm friends in the fairy country, and the only real grief the Ozites had ever experienced was when Dorothy left them and returned to her Kansas home. Oh, hey, fairy. Sorry. Yeah, it usually is kind of echoey. It might be how I'm facing the mic. But yeah, I'm so glad to see you, fairy. I saw you in Multi's chat. Yeah, I'm going to continue. Now she received a joyful welcome, although no one except Ozma knew at first that she had finally come to stay for good and all. That evening, Dorothy had many callers, and among them were such important people as Tick-Tock, a machine man who thought and spoke and moved by clockwork, her old companion, the genial Shaggy Man, Jack Pumpkinhead, whose body was brushwood, and whose head was a ripe pumpkin with a face carved upon it, the Cowardly Lion and the Hungry Tiger, 2 great beasts from the forest who served Princess Ozma, and Professor H.M. Wogglebug T.E. This Wogglebug was a remarkable creature. He had once been a tiny little bug crawling around in his schoolroom, but he was discovered and highly magnified so that he could be seen more plainly, and while in his magnified condition he had escaped. He had always remained big, and he dressed like a dandy and was so full of knowledge and information, which are distinct acquirements, that he had made himself a professor and the head of the Royal College. Dorothy had a nice visit with these old friends, and also talked a long time with the wizard, who was little and old and withered and dried up, but as merry and active as a child. Afterward, she went to see Billina's fast-growing family of chicks. Toto, Dorothy's little black dog, also met with a cordial reception. Toto was an especial friend of the Shaggy Man, and he knew everyone else. Being the only dog in the land of Oz, he was highly respected by the people who believed animals entitled to every consideration if they behaved themselves properly. Oh, that's such a cute emote. I apologize. Tea went down the wrong pipe. Dorothy had 4 lovely rooms in the palace, which were always reserved for her use, and were called Dorothy's rooms. These consisted of a beautiful sitting room, a dressing room, a dainty bedchamber, and a big marble bathroom, and in these rooms were everything that heart could desire, placed there with loving thoughtfulness by Ozma for her little friend's use. The royal dressmakers had the little girl's measure, so they kept the closets in her dressing room filled with lovely dresses of every description and suitable for every occasion. No wonder Dorothy had refrained from bringing with her old calico and gingham dresses. Here everything that was dear to the little girl's heart was supplied in profusion, and nothing so rich and beautiful could ever have been found in the biggest department stores in America. Of course, Dorothy enjoyed all these luxuries, and the only reason she had hitherto preferred to live in Kansas was because her uncle and aunt loved her and needed her with them. Now, however, all was to be changed, and Dorothy was really more delighted to know that her dear relatives were to share in her good fortune and enjoy the delights of the land of Oz than she was to possess such luxury for herself. Next morning, at Ozma's request, Dorothy dressed herself in a pretty sky-blue gown of silk. Dorothy dressed herself in a pretty sky-blue gown of rich silk, trimmed with real pearls. The buckles of her shoes were set with pearls, too, and more of these priceless gems were on a lovely coronet, which she now wore upon her forehead. "For," said her friend Ozma, "from this time forth, my dear, you must assume your rightful rank as a princess of Oz, and being my chosen companion, you must dress in a way befitting the dignity of your position." Dorothy agreed to this, although she knew that neither gowns nor jewels could make her anything else than the simple, unaffected little girl she had always been. As soon as they had breakfasted, the girls eating together in Ozma's pretty boudoir, the ruler of Oz said, "Now, dear friend, we will use the magic belt to transport your uncle and aunt from Kansas to the Emerald City, but I think it would be fitting in receiving such distinguished guests for us to sit in my throne room." "Oh, they're not very distinguished, Ozma," said Dorothy. "They're just plain people like me." "Being your friends and relatives, Princess Dorothy, they are certainly distinguished," replied the ruler with a smile. They won't hardly know what to make of all your splendid furniture and things," protested Dorothy gravely. "It may scare 'em to see your grand throne room. And perhaps we'd better go into the backyard, Ozma, where the cabbages grow and the chickens are playing. Then it would seem more natural to Uncle Henry and Aunt Em." "No, they shall first see me in my throne room," replied Ozma decidedly, and when she spoke in that tone, Dorothy knew it was not wise to oppose her, for Ozma was accustomed to having her own way. So together they went to the throne room, an immense domed chamber in the center of the palace. Here stood the royal throne, made of solid gold and encrusted with enough precious stones to stock a dozen jewelry stores in our country. Ozma, who was wearing the magic belt, seated herself in the throne, and Dorothy sat at her feet. In the rooms were assembled many ladies and gentlemen of the court, clothed in rich apparel and wearing fine jewelry. 2 immense animals squatted, one on each side of the throne, the Cowardly Lion and the Hungry Tiger. In a balcony high up in the dome, an orchestra played sweet music, and beneath the dome 2 electric fountains sent sprays of colored perfumed water, shooting up nearly as high as the arched ceiling. "Are you ready, Dorothy?" asked the ruler. "I am," replied Dorothy, "but I don't know whether Aunt Em and Uncle Henry are ready." "That won't matter," declared Ozma.
The old life can have very little to interest them, and the sooner they begin the new life here, the happier they will be. Here they come, my dear." As she spoke, there before the throne appeared Uncle Henry and Aunt Em, who for a moment stood motionless, glaring with white and startled faces at the scene that confronted them. If the ladies and gentlemen present were not being so polite, I am sure they would have laughed at the two strangers. Aunt Em had her calico dress skirt tucked up, and she wore a faded blue checkered apron. Her hair was rather straggly, and she had a pair of Uncle Henry's old slippers. In one hand she held a dish towel, and in the other a cracked earthenware plate which she had been engaged in wiping when so suddenly transported to the land of Oz. Uncle Henry, when the summons came, had been out in the barn doing chores. He wore a ragged and much soiled straw hat, a checked shirt without any collar, and blue overalls tucked into the tops of his old cowhide boots. "By gum!" gasped Uncle Henry, looking around as if bewildered. "Well, I swan!" gurgled Aunt Em in a hoarse, frightened voice. Then her eyes fell upon Dorothy, and she said, "Don't that look like our little girl? Our Dorothy, Henry?" "Hi there! Look out, Em," replied the old man as Aunt Em advanced a step. "Take care of the wild beasties, or you're a goner." But now Dorothy sprang forward and embraced and kissed her aunt and uncle affectionately, afterward taking their hands in her own. "Don't be afraid," she said to them. "You are now in the land of Oz, where you are to live always and be comfortable and happy. You'll never have to worry over anything again, 'cause there won't be anything to worry about. And you know you owe it all to the kindness of my friend, Princess Ozma." Here she led them before the throne and continued, "Your Highness, this is Uncle Henry, and this is Aunt Em. They want to thank you for bringing them here from Kansas." Aunt Em tried to slip her hair, and she hid the dish towel and dish under her apron while she bowed to the lovely Ozma. Uncle Henry took off his hat and held it awkwardly in his hands. But the ruler of Oz rose and came from her throne to greet her newly arrived guests, and she smiled as sweetly upon them as if they had been a king and queen. "You are very welcome here, where I have brought you for Princess Dorothy's sake," she said graciously, "and I hope you will be quite happy in your new home." Then she turned to her courtiers, who were silently and gravely regarding the scene, and added, "I present to my people our Princess Dorothy's beloved Uncle Henry and Aunt Em, who will hereafter be subjects of our kingdom. It will please me to have you show them every kindness and honor in your power, and to join me in making them happy and contented." Hearing this, all those assembled bowed low and respectfully to the old farmer and his wife, who bobbled their own heads in return. "And now," said Ozma to them, "Dorothy will show you the rooms prepared for you. I hope you will like them, and shall expect you to join me at luncheon." So Dorothy led her relatives away, and as soon as they were out of the throne room and alone in the corridor, Aunt Em squeezed Dorothy's hand and said, Child, how in the world did we ever get here so quick? And is it all real? And are we to stay here, as she says? And what does it all mean anyhow?" Dorothy laughed. "Why didn't you tell us what you were going to do?" inquired Uncle Henry reproachfully. "If I'd have known about it, I'd have put on my Sunday clothes." "I'll explain everything as soon as we get to your rooms," replied Dorothy. "You're in great luck, Uncle Henry and Aunt Em, and so am I. And oh, I'm so happy to have got you here at last." As he walked by the little girl's side, Uncle Henry stroked his whiskers thoughtfully. "'Pears to me, Dorothy, we won't make bang-up fairies," he remarked. "And my back hair looks like a fright," wailed Aunt Em. "Never mind," returned the little girl reassuringly. "You won't have anything to do now but to look pretty. Aunt Em and Uncle Henry won't have to work till his back aches. That's certain." "Sure?" they asked wonderingly, and in the same breath, course I'm sure, said Dorothy. You're in the fairyland of Oz now, and what's more, you belong to it. By back hairs, she meant the hairs on the back of her head, as opposed to hairs on her back. Taking a small hydration. Oh, I wanted to see, is that one of your emotes? Ooh, who is Glitter too? Or who is Glitter? That is pretty cute. I love it. Chapter 6. How Guff Visited the Whimsies. The new general of the Gnome King's army knew perfectly well that to fail in his plans meant death for him. Yet he was not at all anxious or worried. He hated everyone who was good and longed to make all who were happy unhappy. Therefore, he had accepted this dangerous position as general quite willingly, feeling sure in his evil mind that he would be able to do a lot of mischief and finally conquer the land of Oz. Yet Guff determined to be careful and to lay his plans well so as not to fail. He argued that only careless people fail in what they attempt to do. The mountains underneath the Gnome King's extensive caverns were located which the Gnome King's extensive caverns were located, lay grouped just north of the land of Ev, the importance of commas, which lay directly across the deadly desert to the east of the land of Oz. As the mountains were also on the edge of the desert, the Gnome King found that he had only to tunnel underneath the desert to reach Ozma's dominions. He did not wish his armies to appear above ground in the country of the Winkies, which was part of the land of Oz nearest to King Rokat's own country, as then the people would give the alarm and enable Ozma to fortify the Emerald City and assemble an army. He wanted to take all the Oz people by surprise, so he decided to run the tunnels clear through to the Emerald City, where he and his hosts would break through the ground without warning and conquer the people before they had time to defend themselves. Rokat the Red began work at once upon his tunnel, setting 1,000 miners at the task and building it high and broad enough for his armies to march through it with ease. The gnomes were used to making tunnels, as all the kingdom in which they lived was underground, so they made rapid progress. While this work was going on, General Guff started out alone to visit the chief of the Whimsies. These Whimsies were curious people who lived in a retired country of their own. They had large, strong bodies, but heads so small that they were no bigger than doorknobs. Of course, such tiny heads could not contain any great amount of brains, and the Whimsies were so ashamed of their personal appearance and lack of common sense that they wore big heads made of pasteboard, which they fastened over their own little heads. On these pasteboard heads they sewed sheep's wool for hair, and the wool was colored many tints, pink, green, and lavender being the favorite colors. The faces of these false heads were painted in many ridiculous ways, according to the whims of the owners, and these big, burly creatures looked so whimsical and absurd in their queer masks that they were called Whimsies. They foolishly imagined that no one would suspect the little heads that were inside the imitation ones, not knowing that it is folly to try to appear otherwise than as nature has made us. The chief of the Whimsies had as little wisdom as the others, and had been chosen chief merely because none among them was any wiser or more capable of ruling. The Whimsies were evil spirits and could not be killed. They were hated and feared by everyone, and were known as terrible fighters because they were so strong and muscular, and had not sense enough to know when they were defeated. General Guff thought the Whimsies would be a great help to the gnomes in the conquest of Oz, for under his leadership they could be induced to fight so long as they could stand up. So he traveled to their country and asked to see the chief, who lived in a house that had a picture of his grotesque false head painted over the doorway. The chief's false head had blue hair, a turned-up nose, and a mouth that stretched half across the face. big green eyes had been painted upon it, but in the center of the chin were 2 small holes made in the pasteboard so that the chief could see through them with his own tiny eyes. For when the big head was fastened upon his shoulders, the eyes in his own natural head were on a level with the false chin. Said General Guff to the chief of the Whimsies, "We gnomes are going to conquer the land of Oz and capture our king's magic belt, which the Oz people stole from him. Then we are going to plunder and destroy the whole country, and we want the Whimsies to help us." "Will there be any fighting?" asked the chief. "Plenty," replied Guff. That must have pleased the chief, for he got up and danced around the room 3 times. Then he seated himself again, adjusted his false head, and said, "We have no quarrel with Ozma of Oz. But you Whimsies love to fight, and there is a splendid chance to do so," urged Guff. "Wait till I sing a song," said the chief. Then he lay back in his chair and sang a foolish song that did not seem to the general to mean anything, although he listened carefully. When he had finished, the chief Whimsy looked at him through the holes in his chin and asked, "What reward will you give us if we help you?" The general was prepared for this question, for he had been thinking the matter over on his journey. People often do a good deed without hope of reward, but for an evil deed they always demand payment. "When we get our magic belt," he made reply, "our King Rokat the Red will use his power to give every Whimsy a natural head as big and fine as the false head he now wears. Then you will no longer be ashamed because your big, strong bodies have such teensy-weensy heads." "Oh, will you do that?" asked the chief eagerly. "We surely will," promised the general. "I'll talk to my people," said the chief. So he called a meeting of all the Whimsies and told them of the offer made by the gnomes. The creatures were delighted with the bargain, and at once agreed to fight for the Gnome King and help him to conquer Oz. One Whimsy alone seemed to have a glimmer of sense, for he asked, "Suppose we fail to capture the magic belt, what will happen then, and what good will all our fighting do?" But they threw him into the river for asking foolish questions, and laughed when the water ruined his pasteboard head before he could swim out of it. So the compact was made, and General Guff was delighted with his success in gaining such powerful allies. But there were other people, too, just as important as the Whimsies, whom the clever old gnome had determined to win to his side. Chapter 7. How Aunt Em Conquered the Lion. "These are your rooms," said Dorothy, opening a door. Aunt Em drew back at the sight of the splendid furniture and draperies. "Ain't there any place to wipe my feet?" she asked. "You will soon change your slippers for new shoes," replied Dorothy. "Don't be afraid, Aunt Em. Here is where you are to live, so walk right in and make yourself at home." Aunt Em advanced hesitatingly. "It beats the Topeka Hotel," she cried admirably. "But this place is too grand for us, child. Can't we have some back room in the attic? That's more in our class." "No," said Dorothy. "You've got to live here 'cause Ozma says so, and all the rooms in this palace are just as fine as these, and some are better. It won't do any good to fuss, Aunt Em. We've got to be swell and high-toned in the land of Oz, whether you want to or not. So you may as well make up your mind to it." "That's hard luck," replied her aunt, looking around with odd expression. "But folks can get used to anything if they try, eh, Henry?" "Why, as to that," said Uncle Henry slowly, "I believe in taking what's provided us and asking no questions. I've traveled some in my time, and you hain't. And that makes a difference between us." When Dorothy showed them through the rooms, the first was a handsome sitting room with windows opened upon the rose gardens. Then came separate bedrooms for Aunt Em and Uncle Henry, with a fine bathroom between them. Aunt Em had a pretty dressing room besides, and Dorothy opened the closets and showed several exquisite costumes that had been provided for her aunt by the royal dressmakers, who had worked all night to get them ready.
Everything that Aunt Em could possibly need was in the drawers and closets, and her dressing table was covered with engraved gold toilet articles. "Oh, hey, Regent. Good to see you." Uncle Henry had 9 suits of clothes cut in the popular Munchkin fashion, with high breeches, silk stockings, and low shoes with jeweled buckles. The hats to match these costumes had pointed tops and wide brims with small gold bells around the edges. His shirts were of fine linen with frilled bosoms, and his vests were richly embroidered with colored silks. Uncle Henry decided that he would first take a bath and then dress himself in blue satin suit that had caught his fancy. He accepted his good fortune with calm composure and refused to have a servant to assist him. But Aunt Em was all of a flutter, as she said, and it took Dorothy and Jellia Jam, the housekeeper, and 2 maids a long time to dress her and do up her hair and get her rigged like a popinjay, as she quaintly expressed it. She wanted to stop and admire everything that caught her eye, and she sighed continually and declared that such finery was too good for an old country woman, and that she never thought she would have to put on airs at this time of her life. Finally she was dressed, and when they went into the sitting-room, where there was Uncle Henry in his blue satin walking gravely up and down the rooms. He had trimmed his beard and mustache and looked very dignified and respectable. "Tell me, Dorothy," he said, "do all the men here wear duds like these?" "Yes," she replied, "all except the Scarecrow and the Shaggy Man, and of course the Tin Woodman and Tick-Tock, who are made of metal. But you'll find all the men of Ozma's court dressed just as you are, only perhaps a little finer." "Henry, you look like a play actor," announced Aunt Em, looking at her husband critically. "And you, Em, look like a more highfalutin than a peacock," he replied. "I guess you're right," she said regretfully, "but we're helpless victims of high-toned royalty." Dorothy was much amused. "Come with me," she said, "and I'll show you round the palace." She took them through the beautiful rooms and introduced them to all the people they chanced to meet. Also, she showed them her own pretty rooms, which were not far from her own. "So it's all true," said Aunt Em, wide-eyed with amazement. "And what Dorothy told us of this fairy country was plain facts instead of dreams. But where are all the strange creatures you used to know?" "Yes, where's the Scarecrow?" inquired Uncle Henry. "Why, he's just now away on a visit to the Tin Woodman, who's Emperor of the Winkie Country," answered the little girl. "You'll see him when he comes back, and you're sure to like him." "Where's the wonderful wizard?" asked Aunt Em. "You'll see him at Ozma's luncheon, for he lives here in this palace," was the reply. "Jack Pumpkinhead?" "Oh, he lives a little way out of town in his own pumpkin field. We'll go there sometime and see him, and we'll call on Professor Wogglebug, too. The Shaggy Man will be at the luncheon, I guess, and Tick-Tock. And now I'll show you out to see Billina, who has a house of her own." So they went into the backyard, and after walking along winding paths some distance through the beautiful gardens, they came to an attractive little house where the yellow hen sat on the front porch sunning herself. "Good morning, my dear mistress," called Billina, fluttering down to meet her. "I was expecting you to call, for I heard you had come back and brought your uncle and aunt with you." "We're here for good and all this time, Billina," cried Dorothy joyfully. "Uncle Henry and Aunt Em belong to Oz now as much as I do." "Then they are very lucky people," declared Billina, "for there couldn't be a nicer place to live. But come, my dear, I must show you all my Dorothys. 9 are living and have grown up to be very respectable hens, but one took cold at Ozma's birthday party and died of the pip, and the other 2 turned out to be horrid roosters, so I had to change their names from Dorothy to Daniel. They all had the letter D engraved upon their gold lockets, you remember, with your picture inside, and D stands for Daniel as well as for Dorothy." "But you called both the roosters... Did you call both the roosters Daniel?" asked Uncle Henry. "Yes, indeed. I've 9 Dorothys and 2 Daniels, and the 9 Dorothys have
86 sons and daughters and over 300 grandchildren," said Billina proudly. "What names do you give 'em all? Dear?" inquired the little girl. "Oh, they are all Dorothys and Daniels, some being juniors and some double juniors. Dorothy and Daniel are two good names, and I see no object in hunting for others," declared the yellow hen. "But just think, Dorothy, what a big chicken family we've grown to be, and our numbers increase nearly every day. Ozma doesn't know what to do with all the eggs we lay, and we are never eaten or harmed in any way as chickens are in your country. They give us everything to make us contented and happy, and I, my dear, am the acknowledged queen and governor of every chicken in Oz because I'm the eldest and started the whole colony." "You ought to be very proud, ma'am," said Uncle Henry, who was astonished to hear a hen talk so sensibly.
"Oh, I am," she replied. "I have the loveliest pearl necklace you ever saw. Come in the house and I'll show it to you. And I've 9 leg bracelets and a diamond pin for each wing, but I only wear them on state occasions." They followed the yellow hen into the house, which Aunt Em declared was neat as a pin. They could not sit down because all Billina's chairs were roosting poles made of silver, so they had to stand while the hen fussily showed them her treasures. Then they had to go into the back rooms, occupied by Billina's 9 Dorothys and 2 Daniels, who were all plump yellow chickens and greeted the visitors very politely. It was easy to see that they were well bred and that Billina had looked after their education. In the yards were all the children and grandchildren of these 11 elders, and they were of all sizes, from well-grown hens to tiny chickens just out of the shell. About 50 fluffy yellow youngsters were at school, being taught good manners and good grammar by a young hen who wore spectacles. They sang in chorus a patriotic song of the land of Oz in honor of their visitors, and Aunt Em was much impressed by these talking chickens. Dorothy wanted to stay and play with the young chickens for a while, but Uncle Henry and Aunt Em had not seen the palace grounds and gardens yet, and were eager to get better acquainted with the marvelous and delightful land in which they were to live. "I'll stay here, and you can go for a walk," said Dorothy. "You'll be perfectly safe anywhere, and may do whatever you want to. When you get tired, go back to the palace and find your rooms, and I'll come to you before luncheon is over." So Uncle Henry and Aunt Em started out alone to explore the grounds, and Dorothy knew that they couldn't get lost, because all the palace grounds were enclosed by a high wall of green marble set with emeralds. It was a rare treat to see simple folk, who had lived in the country all their lives and known little enjoyment of any sort, to wear beautiful clothes and live in a palace and be treated with respect and consideration by all around them. They were very happy indeed as they strolled up the shady walks and looked upon the gorgeous flowers and shrubs, feeling that their new home was more beautiful than any tongue could describe. Suddenly, as they turned a corner and walked through a gap in a high hedge, they came face to face with an enormous lion, which crouched upon the green lawn and seemed surprised by their appearance. They stopped short, Uncle Henry trembling with horror, and Aunt Em too petrified to scream. Next moment the poor woman clasped her husband round the neck and cried, "Save me, Henry! Save me!" "Can't even save myself, Em," he returned in a husky voice, "for the animal looks as if he could eat both of us, and lick its chops for more. If only I had a gun. Haven't you, Henry? Haven't you?" she asked anxiously. "Nary gun, Em. So let's die as brave and graceful as we can. I know our luck couldn't last." "I won't die. I won't be eaten by a lion," wailed Aunt Em, glaring upon the huge beast. Then a thought struck her, and she whispered, "Henry, I've heard as savage beasts can be conquered by the human eye. I'll eye that lion out a countenance and save our lives." "Try it, Em," he returned also in a whisper. "Look at him as you do to me when I'm late for dinner." Aunt Em turned upon the lion a determined countenance and a wild, dilated eye. She glared at the immense beast steadily, and the lion, who had been quietly blinking at them, began to appear uneasy and disturbed.
Is anything the matter, ma'am? He asked in a mild voice. At this speech from the terrible beast, Aunt Em and Uncle Henry both were startled, and then Uncle Henry remembered that this must be the lion they had seen in Ozma's throne room. "Hold on, Em!" he exclaimed. "Quit the eagle-eye conquest and take courage. I guess this is the same cowardly lion Dorothy has told us about." "Oh, is it?" she cried, much relieved. "When he spoke, I got the idea, and when he looked so shamed-like, I was sure of it," Uncle Henry continued. Aunt Em regarded the animal with new interest. "Are you the Cowardly Lion?" she inquired. "Are you Dorothy's friend?" "Yes'm," answered the lion meekly. "Dorothy and I are old chums, and are very fond of each other. I'm the King of Beasts, you know, and the Hungry Tiger and I serve Princess Ozma and her bodyguards." "To be sure," said Aunt Em, nodding. "But the King of Beasts shouldn't be cowardly." "I've heard that said before," remarked the lion, yawning till he showed 2 great rows of sharp white teeth. "But that does not keep me from being frightened whenever I go into battle." "What do? Run?" asked Uncle Henry. "No, that would be foolish, for the enemy would run after me," declared the lion. "So I tremble with fear and pitch in as hard as I can, and so far I've always won my fight." "Oh, I begin to understand," said Uncle Henry. "Were you scared when I looked at you just now?" inquired Aunt Em. "Terribly scared, madam," replied the lion, "for at first I thought you were going to have a fit. Then I noticed you were trying to overcome me by the power of your eye, and your glance was so fierce and penetrating that I shook with fear." This greatly pleased the lady, and she said quite cheerfully, "Well, I won't hurt you, so don't be scared any more. I just wanted to see what the human eye was good for." "The human eye is a fearful weapon," remarked the lion, scratching his nose softly with his paw to hide a smile. "Had I not known you were Dorothy's friends, I might have torn you both into shreds in order to escape your terrible gaze." Aunt Em shuddered at hearing this, and Uncle Henry said hastily, "I'm glad you knew us. Good morning, Mr. Lion. We'll hope to see you again by and by, some time in the future." "Good morning," replied the lion, squatting down upon the lawn again. "You're likely to see a good deal of me if you live in the land of Oz." I'm excited to see the little cat treat in front of your name regent. I'm glad they turned out so well. Alright, Chapter 8. How the Grand Gallipoot Joined the Gnomes. After leaving the Whimsies, Guff continued on his journey and penetrated far into the northwest. He wanted to get to the country of the Growlywogs, and in order to do that, he must cross the Ripple Land, which was a hard thing to do. For the Ripple Land was a succession of hills and valleys, all very steep and rocky, and they changed places constantly by rippling. While Guff was climbing a hill, it sank down under him and became a valley, and while he was descending into a valley, it rose up and carried him to the top of a hill. It was very perplexing to the traveler, and a stranger might have thought he could never cross the Ripple Land at all. But Guff knew that if he kept steadily on, he would get to the end at last. So he paid no attention to the changing hills and valleys, and plodded along as calmly as if walking upon the level ground. The result of this wise persistence was that the general finally reached firmer soil, and after penetrating a dense forest, came to the dominion of the Growlywogs. No sooner had he crossed the border of this domain when 2 guards seized him and carried him before the Grand Gallipoot of the Growlywogs, who growled upon him ferociously and asked him why he dared intrude upon his territory. "I am the Lord High General of the Invincible Army of the Gnomes, and my name is Guff," was the reply. "All the world trembles when that name is mentioned." The Growlywogs gave a shout of jeering laughter at this, and one of them caught the gnome in his strong arms and tossed him high into the air. Guff was
considerably shaken when he fell upon the hard ground, but he appeared to take no notice of the impertinence, and composed himself to speak again to the Grand Galliput. My master, King Rokat the Red, has sent me here to confer with you. He wishes your assistance to conquer the land of Oz. Here the general paused, and the Grand Galliput scowled upon him more terribly than ever, and said, Go on. The voice of the Grand Galliput was partly a roar and partly a growl. He mumbled his words badly, and Gulf had to listen carefully in order to understand him. These growlywogs were certainly remarkable creatures. They were of gigantic size, yet were all bone and skin and muscle, there being no meat or fat upon their bodies at all. Their powerful muscles lay just underneath their skins, like bunches of tough rope, and the weakest growlywog was so strong that he could pick up an elephant and toss it 7 miles away. It seems unfortunate that strong people are usually so disagreeable and overbearing that no one cares for them. In fact, to be different from your fellow creatures is always a misfortune. The growlywogs knew that they were disliked and avoided by everyone, so they had become surly and unsociable, even among themselves. Guff knew that they hated all people, including the gnomes, but he hoped to win them over, nevertheless, and knew that if he succeeded, they would afford him very powerful assistance. The land of Oz is ruled by a namby-pamby girl who is disgustingly kind and good, he continued. Her people are all happy and contented, and have no care or worries whatsoever. Go on, growled the Grand Galliput. Once the Gnome King enslaved the royal family of Ev, another goody-goody lot that we detest, said the general. But Ozma interfered, although it was none of her business, and marched her army against us. Oh, hello, Shaltir. Good to see you. Oh, hi, Kicken. Oh, I'm sorry that you have bad insomnia. I hope this helps. But yeah, thank you so much for joining me. My name is Sunny. I'm in the middle of the Emerald City of Oz Part 1. I just started it recently, and in about, my name is Sunny, by the way, in about 24 hours I'll be putting this on YouTube, so you can go back and get caught up if you'd like. And Corel has posted the Discord if you wanted to join us there, and I post up whenever I'm streaming. All right. With her was a Kansas girl named Dorothy and a yellow hen, and they marched directly into the Gnome King's cavern. They liberated our slaves from Ev and stole King Rokat's magic belt, which they carried away with them. So now our king is making a tunnel under the deadly desert so we can march through it to the Emerald City. When we get there, we mean to conquer and destroy all the land and recapture the magic belt. Again he paused, and again the Grand Galliput growled, Go on. Guff tried to think what to say next, and a happy thought soon occurred to him. We want you to help us in this conquest, he announced, for we need mighty aid of the growlywogs in order to make sure that we shall not be defeated. Oh, okay, yeah. Oh, I love Z. She's great. You are the strongest people in all the world, and you hate good and happy creatures as much as we gnomes do. I am sure it will be a real pleasure to you to tear down the beautiful Emerald City, and in return for your valuable assistance, we will allow you to bring back to your country 10,000 people of Oz to be your slaves. 20,000, growled the Grand Galliput. All right, we promise you 20,000, agreed the general. The Galliput made a signal, and at once his attendants picked up General Guff and carried him away to a prison where the jailer amused himself by sticking pins in the round, fat body of the old gnome, to see him jump and hear him yell. But while this was going on, the Grand Galliput was talking with his counselors, who were the most important officials of the growlywogs. When he had stated to them the proposition of the Gnome King, he said, My advice is to offer to help them. Then, when we have conquered the land of Oz, we will take not only 20,000 prisoners, but all the golden jewels we want." "Let us take the magic belt, too," suggested one counselor. "And rob the Gnome King and make him our slave," said another. "That is a good idea," declared the Grand Gallipoot. "I'd like King Rogcott for my own slave. He could black my boots and bring me my porridge every morning when I'm in bed." "There's a famous scarecrow in Oz. I'll take him for my slave," said the counselor. "I'll take Tick-Tock, the machine man," said another. "Give me the Tin Woodman," said a third. They went on for some time, dividing up the people and the treasure of Oz in advance of the conquest, for they had no doubt at all that they would be able to destroy Ozma's domain. Were they not the strongest people in all the world? "The deadly desert has kept us out of Oz before," remarked the Grand Gallipoot, "but now that the Gnome King is building a tunnel, we shall get into the Emerald City very easily. So let us send the little fat general back to his king with our promise to assist him. We will not say that we intend to conquer the gnomes after we have conquered Oz, but we will do so just the same." This plan being agreed upon, they all went home to dinner, leaving General Guff still in prison. The gnome had no idea that he had succeeded in his mission, for finding himself in prison, he feared the Growlywogs intended to put him to death. By this time, the jailer had tired of sticking pins in the general, and was amusing himself by carefully pulling the gnome's whiskers out by the roots, one at a time. This enjoyment was interrupted by Grand Gallipoot sending for the prisoner. "Wait a few hours," begged the jailer. "I haven't pulled out a quarter of his whiskers yet." "If you keep the Grand Gallipoot waiting, he'll break your back," declared the messenger. "Perhaps you're right," sighed the jailer. "Take the prisoner away if you will, but I advise you to kick him at every step he takes. It will be good fun, for he is as soft as a ripe peach." So Guff was led away to the royal castle, where the Grand Gallipoot told him that the Growlywogs had decided to assist the gnome in conquering the land of Oz. "Whenever you are ready," he added, "send me word, and I will march with 18,000 of my most powerful warriors to your aid." Guff was so delighted that he forgot all the smarting caused by the pins and the pulling of whiskers. He did not even complain of the treatment he had received, but thanked the Grand Gallipoot and hurried away upon his journey. He had now secured the assistance of the Whimsies and the Growlywogs, but his success made him long for still more allies. His own life depended upon this conquering Oz, and he said to himself, "I'll take no chances. I'll be certain of success. Then, when Oz is destroyed, perhaps I shall be a greater man than old Rogcott, and I can throw him away and be king of the gnomes myself. Why not? The Whimsies are stronger than the gnomes, and they are my friends. There are some people still stronger than the Growlywogs, and if I can induce them to aid me, I shall have nothing more to fear." Well, I hope you enjoy your lurk. I'm going to put Maestro up since we're chatting a little bit. But yeah, I'm glad you joined us. Again, I am Sunny. I am a variety streamer. I specialize mostly in like story time, but I do some chill gaming, a little bit of art. So all the art that you see up on the screen is art done by me, and also all the emotes as well. And guess what, guys? We are 5 followers away until we reach 100. That's pretty awesome. I just realized that today. And I was going to tell you something else, and I don't remember what it was. But I do 2 different Storytime series. One that's like family friendly, which I'm doing the Oz series right now, and then after that we have a couple of short spooky stories that we'll be doing for Halloween week, and then we also have an older ages story time. Right now we're working through Dorian Gray, and then we'll do some Poe short stories, and then I think we're going to get started on the Scarlet Pimpernel, and then I've got a few stories planned for Christmas time as well, or holiday stories.
But yeah, on the Discord, we have a place where you can do self-promo. Do you stream, Sheltier? We also have very important, the most important in every Discord, I believe, is the pet pictures channel, where you can post up like pictures of your pet, look at other ones, or just like memes about pets. And of course, we've got recipes and music, and you can post up your art and stuff like that. So I'm going to go ahead and continue. Chapter 9. How the Wogglebug Taught Athletics. It did not take Dorothy long to establish herself in her new home, for she knew the people and the manners and customs of the Emerald City just as well as she knew the old Kansas farm. But Uncle Henry and Aunt Em had some trouble in getting used to the finery and pomp and ceremony of Ozma's palace, and felt uneasy because they were obliged to be dressed up all the time. Yet everyone was very courteous and kind to them, and endeavored to make them happy. Ozma especially made much of Dorothy's relatives for her little friend's sake. And she well knew that the awkwardness and strangeness of their new mode of life would all wear off in time. The old people were chiefly troubled by the fact that there was no work for them to do. "Every day's like Sunday now," declared Aunt Em solemnly, "and I can't say I like it. They'd only let me do up the dishes after meals, or even sweep and dust my own rooms, I'd be a deal happier. Henry don't know what to do with himself either, and once when he stole out and fed the chickens, Billina scolded him for letting him eat between meals. I never knew before what a hardship it is to be rich and have everything you want." These complaints began to worry Dorothy, so she had a long talk with Ozma upon the subject. "I see I must find them something to do," said the girlish ruler of Oz seriously. "I have been watching your uncle and aunt, and I believe they will be more contented if occupied with some light tasks. While I am considering this matter, Dorothy, you might take a trip with them through the land of Oz, visiting some of the odd corners and introducing your relatives to some of their curious people." "Oh, that would be fine!" exclaimed Dorothy eagerly. "If I give you an escort befitting your rank as a princess," continued Ozma, "you may go to some of the places you have not yet visited yourself, as well as some others that you know. I will mark out a plan for the trip for you and have everything in readiness for you to start tomorrow morning. Take your time, dear, and be gone as long as you wish. By the time you return, I shall have found some occupation for Uncle Henry and Aunt Em that will keep them from being restless and dissatisfied." Dorothy thanked her good friend and kissed the lovely ruler gratefully. Probably gracefully as well. Then she ran to tell the joyful news to her uncle and aunt. Next morning, after breakfast, everything was found ready for their departure. The escort included Omby Amby, the Captain General of Ozma's army, which consisted merely of 27 officers, beside the Captain General. Once Omby Amby had been a private soldier, the only private in the army, but as there was never any fighting to do, Ozma saw no need of a private, so she made Omby Amby the highest officer of them all. He was very tall and slim and wore a gay uniform and a fierce mustache. Yet the mustache was the only fierce thing about Omby Amby, whose nature was as gentle as that of a child. The wonderful wizard had asked to join the party, and with him came his friend the Shaggy Man, who was shaggy but not ragged, being dressed in fine silks with satin shags and bobtails. The Shaggy Man had shaggy whiskers and hair, but a sweet disposition and a soft, pleasant voice. There was an open wagon, with 3 seats for the passengers, and the wagon was drawn by the famous wooden sawhorse, which had once been brought to life by Ozma by means of a magic powder. The sawhorse wore golden shoes on to keep his wooden legs from wearing away, and he was strong and swift. As this curious creature was Ozma's own favorite steed, and very popular with all the people of the Emerald City, Dorothy knew that she had been highly favored by being permitted to use the Sawhorse on her journey. In the front seat of the wagon sat Dorothy and the Wizard. Uncle Henry and Aunt Em sat in the next seat, and the Shaggy Man and Omby Amby in the third seat. Of course, Toto was with the party, curled up at Dorothy's feet, and just as they were about to start, Billina came fluttering along the path and begged to be taken with them. Dorothy readily agreed, so the yellow hen flew up and perched herself upon the dashboard. She wore her pearl necklace and 3 bracelets upon each leg in honor of the occasion. Dorothy kissed Ozma goodbye, and all the people standing around waved their handkerchief, and the band in an upper balcony struck up a military march. Then the Wizard clucked at the Sawhorse and said, "Get up!" and the wooden animal pranced away and drew behind him the big red wagon and all the passengers without any effort at all. The servant threw open a gate of the palace enclosure, and they might pass out, and so, with music and shouts following them, the journey was begun. "It's almost like a circus," said Aunt Em proudly. "I can't help feeling high and mighty in this kind of a turnout." Indeed, as they passed down the street, all the people cheered them lustily, and the Shaggy Man and the Wizard and the Captain General all took off their hats and bowed politely in acknowledgment. When they came to the great wall of the Emerald City, the gates were opened by the guardian, who always tended them. Over the gateway hung a dull-colored metal magnet, shaped like a horseshoe, placed against a shield of polished gold. "That," said the Shaggy Man impressively, "is the wonderful love magnet. I brought it to the Emerald City myself, and all who pass beneath the gateway are both loving and beloved." "It's a fine thing," declared Aunt Em admiringly. "If we'd had it in Kansas, I guess the man who held a mortgage on the farm wouldn't have turned us out." "Then I'm glad we didn't have it," returned Uncle Henry. "I like Oz better than Kansas even, and this little old wood sawhorse beats all the critters I ever saw. He don't have to be curried or fed or watered, and he's strong as an ox. Can he talk, Dorothy?" "Yes, Uncle," replied the child, "but the Sawhorse never says much. He told me once that he can't talk and think at the same time, so he prefers to think." "Which is very sensible," declared the Wizard, nodding approvingly. "Which way do we go, Dorothy?" "Straight ahead into the Quadling country," she answered. "I've got a letter of introduction to Miss Cuttenclip." That's a name. Sorry about that. "Oh!" exclaimed the Wizard, much interested. "Are we going there?" "Oh, then I'm glad I came, for I've always wanted to meet the Cuttenclips." "Who are they?" inquired Aunt Em. "Wait till we get there," replied Dorothy with a laugh. "Then you'll see for yourself. I've never seen the Cuttenclips, so I can't exactly explain them to you." Once free of the Emerald City, the Sawhorse dashed away at tremendous speed. Indeed, he went so fast that Aunt Em had hard work to catch her breath, and Uncle Henry held fast to the seat of the red wagon. "Gently, gently, my boy," called the Wizard, and at this the Sawhorse slackened his speed. "What's wrong?" asked the animal, slightly turning his wooden head to look at the party with one eye, which was a knot of wood. "Why, we wish to admire the scenery, that's all," answered the Wizard. "Some of your passengers," added the Shaggy Man, "have never been out of the Emerald City before, and the country is all new to them." "If you go too fast, you'll spoil all the fun," said Dorothy. "There's no hurry." "Very well, it is all the same to me," observed the Sawhorse, and after that he went at a more moderate pace. Uncle Henry was astonished. "How can a wooden thing be so intelligent?" he asked. "Why, I gave him some sawdust brains the last time I fitted his head with new ears," explained the Wizard. "The sawdust was made from hard knots, and now the Sawhorse is able to think out any knotty problem he meets with." "I see," said Uncle Henry. "I don't," remarked Aunt Em, but no one paid any attention to this statement. Before long they came to a stately building that stood upon a green plain with handsome shade trees grouped here and there. "What is that?" asked Uncle Henry. "That," replied the wizard, "is the Royal Athletic College of Oz, which is directed by Professor H.M. Wogglebug, T.E. "Let's stop and make a call," suggested Dorothy. So the sawhorse drew in front of the great building, and they were met at the door by the learned Wogglebug himself. He seemed fully as tall as the wizard, and was dressed in a red and white checkered vest and blue swallowtail coat, and had yellow knee breeches and purple silk stockings upon his slender legs. That is colorful. A tall hat was jauntily set upon his head, and he wore spectacles over his big bright eyes. "Welcome, Dorothy," said the Wogglebug, "and welcome to all your friends. We are indeed pleased to receive you at this great temple of learning." "I thought it was an athletic college," said the Shaggy Man. "It is, my dear sir," answered the Wogglebug proudly. "Here it is that we teach the youth of our great land scientific college athletics in all their purity." "Don't you teach them anything else?" asked Dorothy. "Don't they get any reading, writing, and arithmetic?" "Oh, yes, of course, they get all those and more," returned the professor, "but such things occupy little of their time. Please please follow me, and I will show you how my scholars are usually occupied. This is a class hour, and they are all busy." They followed him to a big field back of the college building, where several hundred young Ozites were at their classes. In one place they played football, in another baseball. Some played tennis, some golf, some were swimming in a big pool. Upon a river which wound through the ground, several crews of racing boats were rowing with great enthusiasm. Other groups of students played basketball and cricket, while in one place a ring was roped in to permit boxing and wrestling by the energetic youths. All the collegians seemed too busy, and there was much laughter and shouting. "This college," said Professor Wogglebug complacently, "is a great success. Its educational value is undisputed, and we are turning out many great and valuable citizens every year." "But when do they study?" asked Dorothy. "Study?" said the Wogglebug, looking perplexed at the question. "Yes, when do they get their arithmetic and geography and such things?" "Oh, they take doses of those every night and morning," was the reply. "What do you mean by doses?" Dorothy inquired wonderingly. "Why, we use the newly invented school pills made by your friend the wizard. These pills we have found to be very effective, and they save a lot of time. Please step this way, and I will show you our laboratory of learning." He led them to a room in the building where many large bottles were standing in rows upon shelves. "These are the algebra pills," said the professor, taking down one of the bottles. "One at night, on retiring, is equal to 4 hours of study. Here are the geography pills, one at night and one in the morning. In this next bottle are the Latin pills, one 3 times a day. Then we have the grammar pills, one before each meal, and the sleeping pills, and the spelling pills, which are taken whenever needed." "Your scholars must have to take a lot of pills," remarked Dorothy thoughtfully. "How do they take 'em, in applesauce?" "No, my dear, they are sugar-coated and are quickly and easily swallowed. I believe the students would rather take the pills than study, and certainly the pills are a more effective method. You see, until these school pills were invented, we wasted a lot of time in study that may now be better employed in practicing athletics." "Seems to me the pills are a good thing," said Omby-Amby, who remembered how it used to make his head ache as a boy to study arithmetic. "They are, sir," replied the Wogglebug earnestly. "They give us an advantage over all other colleges because at no loss of time our boys become thoroughly conversant with Greek and Latin, mathematics and geography, grammar and literature. You see, they are never obliged to interrupt their games to acquire the lesser branches of learning." "It's a great invention, I'm sure," said Dorothy, looking admiringly at the wizard, who blushed modestly at his praise. "We live in an age of progress," announced Professor Wogglebug pompously. "It is easier to swallow knowledge than to acquire it laboriously from books. Is it not so, my friends?" "Some folks can swallow anything," said Aunt Em, "but to me this seems too much like taking medicine." "Young men in college always have to take their medicine one way or another," observed the wizard with a smile. "And as our professor says, these school pills have proved to be a great success. One day while I am making them, I happened to drop one of them, and one of Bellina's chickens gobbled it up. A few minutes afterwards, the chick got upon a roost, and recited 'The Boy Stood on the Burning Deck' without making a single mistake. Then it recited 'The Charge of the Light Brigade,' and afterwards 'Excelsior!' You see, the chicken had eaten an elocution pill." They now bade goodbye to the professor and thanked him for his kind reception, mounted again into the red wagon, and continued their journey. Chapter 10. How the Cuttenclips Lived. The travelers had taken no provisions with them because they knew that they would be welcome whenever they might go in the land of Oz, and that the people would feed and lodge them with genuine hospitality. So about noon they stopped at a farmhouse and were given a delicious luncheon of bread and milk, fruits and wheat cakes with maple syrup. After resting a while and strolling through the orchards with their host, a round, jolly farmer, they got into the wagon and again started the sawhorse along the pretty, winding road. There were signposts at all the corners, and finally they came to one which read, "Take this road to the Cuttenclips." There was also a hand pointing in the right direction, so they turned the sawhorse that way and found it a very good road, but seemingly little traveled. "Never seen the Cuttenclips before," remarked Dorothy. "Nor I," said the Captain General. "Nor I," said the Wizard. "Nor I," said Bellina. "I've hardly been out of the Emerald City since I arrived in this country," added the Shaggy Man. "Why, none of us have been there then," exclaimed the little girl. "I wonder what the Cuttenclips are like." "We shall soon find out," said the Wizard with a sly laugh. "I've heard they are rather flimsy things." The farmhouses became fewer as they proceeded, and the path was at times so faint that the sawhorse had hard work to keep in the road. The wagon began to jounce, too, so they were obliged to go slowly. After a somewhat wearisome journey, they came in sight of a high wall painted blue with pink ornaments. This wall was circular and seemed to enclose a large space. It was so high that only the tops of the trees could be seen above it. The path led up to a small door in the wall, which was closed and latched. Upon the door was a sign in gold letters, reading as follows: "Visitors are requested to move slowly and carefully, and to avoid coughing or making any breeze or draught." "That's strange," said the Shaggy Man, reading the sign aloud. "Who are the Cuttenclips, anyhow?" "Why, they're paper dolls," answered Dorothy. "Didn't you know that?" "Paper dolls? Well, then let's go somewhere else," said Uncle Henry. "We're all too old to play with dolls, Dorothy." "These are different," declared the girl. "They're alive." "Alive?" Aunt Em gasped in amazement. "Yes, let's go in," said Dorothy. So they all got out of the wagon, since the door in the wall was not big enough for them to drive the sawhorse and wagon through it. "You stay here, Toto," commanded Dorothy, shaking her finger at the little dog. "You're so careless that you might make a breeze if I let you inside." Toto wagged his tail as if disappointed at being left behind, but he made no effort to follow them. The Wizard unlatched the door, which opened outward, and they all looked eagerly inside. Just before the entrance was drawn up a line of tiny soldiers with uniforms brightly painted and paper guns upon their shoulders. They were exactly alike from one end of the line to the other, and all were cut out of paper and joined together in the centers of their bodies. As the visitors entered the enclosure, the wizard let the door swing back into place, and at once the line of soldiers tumbled over, fell flat upon their backs, and lay fluttering upon the ground. "Hi there," called one of them. "What do you mean by slamming the door and blowing us over?" "I beg your pardon, I'm sure," said the wizard regretfully. "I didn't know you were so delicate." "We're not delicate," retorted another soldier, raising his head from the ground. "We are strong and healthy, but we can't stand drafts." "May I help you up?" asked Dorothy. "If you please," replied the end soldier, "but do it gently, little girl." Dorothy carefully stood up the line of soldiers, who first dusted their painted clothes and then saluted the visitors with their paper muskets. From the end it was easy to see that the entire line had been cut out of paper, although from the front the soldiers looked rather solid and imposing. "I have a letter of introduction from Princess Ozma to Miss Cuttenclip," announced Dorothy. "Very well," said the end soldier, and blew upon a paper whistle that hung around his neck. At once a paper soldier in a captain's uniform came out of a paper house nearby and approached the group at the entrance. He was not very big, and he walked rather stiffly and uncertainly on his paper legs, but he had a pleasant face with very red cheeks and very blue eyes, and he bowed so low to the strangers that Dorothy laughed, and the breeze from her mouth nearly blew the captain over. He wavered and struggled, and finally managed to remain upon his feet. "Take care, miss," he said warningly. "You're breaking the rules, you know, by laughing." "Oh, I didn't know that. To laugh in this place is nearly as dangerous as a cough," said the captain. "You'll have to breathe very quietly, I assure you." "We'll try to," promised the girl. "May I see Miss Cuttenclip, please?" "You may," promptly returned the captain. This is one of her reception days. Be good enough to follow me." He turned and led the way up a path, and as they followed slowly, because the paper captain did not move very swiftly, they took the opportunity to gaze around them at this strange paper country. Beside the path were paper trees, all cut out very neatly and painted a brilliant green color, and back of the trees were rows of cardboard houses painted in various colors, but most of them having green blinds. Some were large and some small, and in the front yards were beds of paper flowers quite natural in appearance. Over some of the porches paper vines were twined, giving them a cozy and shady look. As the visitors passed along the street, a good many paper dolls came to the doors and windows of their houses to look at them curiously. These dolls were nearly all the same height, but were cut into various shapes, some being fat and some lean. The girl dolls wore many beautiful costumes of tissue paper, making them quite fluffy, but their heads and hands were no thicker than the paper of which they were made. Some of the paper people were on the street, walking along or congregating in groups and talking together, but as soon as they saw the strangers, they all fluttered into the houses as fast as they could go, so as to be out of danger. "Excuse me if I go edgewise," remarked the captain as they came to a slight hill. "I can get along faster that way, and not flutter so much. "That's all right," said Dorothy. "We don't mind how you go, I'm sure." At one side of the street was a paper pump, and a paper boy was pumping paper water into a paper pail. The yellow hen happened to brush against this boy with her wing, and he flew into the air and fell into a paper tree, where he stuck until the wizard gently pulled him out. At the same time, the pail went into the air, spilling the paper water, while the paper pump bent nearly double. "Goodness me," said the hen. "If I should flop my wings, I believe I'd knock over the whole village." "Then don't flop them, please don't," entreated the captain. "Miss Cuttenclip would be very much distressed if her village was spoiled." "Oh, I'll be careful," promised Billina. "Are not all these paper girls and women named Miss Cuttenclips?" inquired Omby Amby. "No, indeed," answered the captain, who was walking better since he began to move edgewise. "There is but one Miss Cuttenclip, who was our queen, because she made us all. These girls are Cuttenclips, to be sure, but their names are Emily and Polly and Sue and Betty and such things. Only the queen is called Miss Cuttenclips." I must say that this place beats anything I ever heard of, observed Aunt Em. I used to play with paper dolls myself and cut 'em out, but I never thought I'd see such things alive. I don't see as it's any more curious than hearing hens talk, replied Uncle Henry. You're likely to see many queer things in the land of Oz, sir, said the wizard, but a fairy country is extremely interesting when you get used to being surprised. Here we are, called the captain, stopping before a cottage. This house was made of wood and was remarkably pretty in design. In the Emerald City it would have been considered a tiny dwelling, indeed, but in the midst of this paper village it seemed immense. Real flowers were in the garden and real trees grew beside it. Upon the front door was a sign reading, Miss Cut-and-Clip. Just as they reached the porch, the front door opened and a little girl stood before them. She appeared to be about the same age as Dorothy and smiled upon her visitors as she said sweetly, You are welcome. All the party seemed relieved to find that there was a real girl of flesh and blood. She was very dainty and pretty as she stood there welcoming them. Her hair was golden blonde and her eyes turquoise blue. She had rosy cheeks and lovely white teeth. Over her simple white lawn dress she wore an apron with pink and white checks, and in one hand she held a pair of scissors. May we see Miss Cut-and-Clip, please? Asked Dorothy. I am Miss Cut-and-Clip, was the reply. Won't you come in? She held the door open while they all entered a pretty sitting room that was littered with all sorts of paper, some stiff, some thin, and some tissue. The sheets and scraps were of all colors. Upon a table were paints and brushes, while several pairs of scissors of different sizes were lying about. Sit down, please, said Miss Cut-and-Clip, clearing the paper scraps off of some of the chairs. It is so long since I have had any visitors that I'm not much properly prepared to receive them. But I'm sure you will pardon my untidy room, for this is my workshop. Do you make all the paper dolls? Inquired Dorothy. Yes, I cut them out with my scissors and paint the faces and some of the costumes. It is very pleasant work, and I'm happy making my paper village grow. But how do the paper dolls happen to be alive? Asked Aunt Em. The first dolls I made were not alive, said Miss Cut-and-Clip. I used to live near the castle of a great sorceress named Glinda the Good, and she saw my dolls and said they were very pretty. I told her I thought I would like them better if they were alive, and the next day the sorceress brought me a lot of magic paper. This is live paper, she said, and all the dolls you cut out of it will be alive and able to think and to talk. When you have used it all up, come to me and I will give you more. Of course I was delighted with this present, continued Miss Cut-and-Clip, and at once set to work and made several paper dolls, which, as soon as they were cut out, began to walk around and talk to me. But they were so thin that I found that any breeze would blow them over and scatter them dreadfully, so Glinda found this lonely place for me, where few people ever come. She built the wall and kept any wind from blowing away my people, and told me I could build a paper village here and be its queen. Oh, hi, Pafiki, good to see you. I'm sorry, it's supposed to have the, where is it? This emote. Let's see. That is why I came here and settled down to work and started the village you now see. It was many years ago that I built the first houses, and I've kept pretty busy and made my village grow finely, and I need not tell you that I am very happy in my work. Many years ago, exclaimed Aunt Em. Why, how old are you, child? I never keep track of the years, said Miss Cut-and-Clip, laughing. You see, I don't grow up at all, but just stay the same as I was when first I came here. Perhaps I was older even than you are, madam, but I couldn't say for sure. They looked at the lovely little girl, wondering, and the wizard asked, What happens to your paper village when it rains? It does not rain here, replied Miss Cut-and-Clip. Glinda keeps all the rainstorms away, so I never worry about my dolls getting wet. But now, if you will come with me, it will give me pleasure to show you over my paper kingdom. Of course, you must go slowly and carefully and avoid making any breeze. They left the cottage and followed their guide through the various streets of the village. It was indeed an amazing and Oh, it was indeed an amazing place, when one considered that it was all made with scissors, and the visitors were all only greatly interested, were not only greatly interested, but full of admiration for the skill of little Miss Cuttenclip. In one place, a large group of especially nice paper dolls assembled to greet their queen, whom it was easy to see they loved dearly. These dolls marched and danced before the visitors, and then they all waved their paper handkerchiefs and sang in a sweet chorus a song called "The Flag of Our Native Land." At the conclusion of the song, they ran up a handsome paper flag, up a tall flagpole, and all of the people of the village gathered around to cheer as loudly as they could, although, of course, their voices were not especially strong. Miss Cuttenclip was about to make her subjects a speech in reply to this patriotic song when the Shaggy Man happened to sneeze. He was a very loud and powerful sneezer at any time, and he had tried so hard to hold in the sneeze that when it suddenly exploded, the result was terrible. The paper dolls were mown down by dozens, and flew and fluttered in wild confusion in every direction, tumbling this way and that, and getting more or less wrinkled and bent. A wail of terror and grief came from the scattered throng, and Miss Cuttenclip exclaimed, "Dear me! Dear me!" and hurried at once to the rescue of her overturned people. "Oh, Shaggy Man, how could you?" asked Dorothy. "I couldn't help it. I couldn't," protested the Shaggy Man, looking quite ashamed. "And I had no idea it took so little to upset these paper dolls." "So little?" said Dorothy. "Why, it was almost as bad as a Kansas cyclone." And then she helped Miss Cuttenclip rescue the paper folk and stand them on their feet again. 2 of the cardboard houses had also tumbled over, and the little queen said she would have to repair them and paste them together before they would be lived in again. And now, fearing they might do some damage to the flimsy paper people, they decided to go away. But first they thanked Miss Cuttenclip very warmly for their courtesy and kindness to them. "Any friend of Princess Ozma is always welcome back here, unless he sneezes," said the Queen with a rather severe look at the Shaggy Man, who hung his head. "I like to have visitors admire my wonderful village, and I hope you will call again." Miss Cuttenclip herself led them to the door in the wall, and as they passed along the street, the paper dolls peeped at them half fearfully from the doors and windows. Perhaps they will never forget the Shaggy Man's awful sneeze, and I am sure they were all glad to see the meat people go away. Just taking a quick sip. Chapter 11. How the General Met the First and Foremost. On leaving the Growlywogs, General Guff had to recross the Ripple Lands, and he did not find it a pleasant thing to do. Perhaps having his whiskers pulled out one by one and being used as a pincushion for the innocent amusement of a good-natured jailer had not improved the quality of Guff's temper, for the old gnome raved and raged at the recollection of the wrongs he had suffered, and vowed to take vengeance upon the Growlywogs after he had used them for his purposes, and Oz had been conquered. He went on in this furious way until he was half across the Ripple Land. Then he became seasick, and the rest of the way this naughty gnome was almost as miserable as he deserved to be. But when he reached the plains again, and the ground was firm under his feet and began to feel better, and instead of going back home, he turned directly west. A squirrel perched in a tree saw him take this road and called to him warningly, "Look out!" but he paid no attention. An eagle paused in its flight through the air to look at him wonderingly and said, "Look out!" but on he went. No one can say that Guff was not brave, for he had determined to visit those dangerous creatures, the Phanfasms, who resided upon the very top of the dread mountain of Fantastico. Oh, okay, yeah. Fantastico. The Phanfasms were Arabs. and so dreaded by mortals and immortals alike that no one had been near their mountain homes for several thousand years. Yet General Guff hoped to induce them to join in his proposed warfare against the good and happy people of Oz. Oh, thank you so much, Regent. I have so much fun making the emotes. Guff knew very well that the Phanphasms would be almost as dangerous to the gnomes as they would to the Ozites, but he thought himself so clever that he believed he could manage those strange creatures and make them obey him. And there was no doubt at all that if he could enlist the services of the Phanphasms, their tremendous power united to the strength of the Growlywogs and the cunning of the Whimsies would doom the land of Oz to absolute destruction. So the old gnome climbed the foothills and trudged along the wild mountain paths until he came to a big gully that encircled the mountain of Fantastico and marked the boundary line of the dominion of the Phanphasms. This gully was about a third of the way up the mountain, and it was filled to the brim with red-hot molten lava in which swam fire serpents and poisonous salamanders. The heat from this mass and its poisonous smell were both so unbearable that even birds hesitated to fly over the gully, but circled around it. All living things kept away from the mountain. Now Guff had heard, during his long lifetime, many tales of those dreaded Phanphasms, so he had heard of this barrier of melted lava, and also he had been told that there was a narrow bridge that spanned it in one place. So he walked along the edge until he found the bridge. It was a single arch of gray stone, and lying flat upon the bridge was a scarlet alligator, seemingly fast asleep. When Guff stumbled over the rocks in approaching the bridge, the creature opened its eyes, from which tiny flames shot in all directions. And after looking at the intruder very wickedly, the scarlet alligator closed its eyelids again and lay still. Guff saw there was no room for him to pass the alligator on the narrow bridge, so he called out to him, "Good morning, friend. I don't wish to hurry you, but please tell me if you are coming down or going up." "Neither," snapped the alligator, clicking its cruel jaws together. The general hesitated. "Are you likely to stay here long?" he asked. "Few hundred years or so," said the alligator. Guff softly rubbed the end of his nose and tried to think what to do. "Do you know whether the first and foremost Phanphasm of Fantastico is at home or not?" he presently inquired. "I expect he is, seeing as he is always at home," replied the alligator. "Ah, who was that coming down the mountain?" asked the gnome, gazing upward. The alligator turned to look over its shoulder, and at once Guff ran to the bridge and leaped over the sentinel's back before it could turn back again. The scarlet monster made a snap at the gnome's left foot, but missed it by fully an inch. "Ha ha!" laughed the general, who was now on the mountain path. "I fooled you that time." "So you did. And perhaps you fooled yourself," retorted the alligator. "Go up the mountain if you dare and find out what the first and foremost will do to you." "I will," declared Guff boldly, and on up he went, up the path. At first the scene was wild enough, but gradually it grew more and more awful in appearance. All the rocks had the shapes of frightful beings, and even the tree trunks were gnarled and twisted like serpents. Suddenly there appeared before the gnome a man with the head of an owl. His body was hairy like that of an ape, and his only clothing was a scarlet scarf twisted around his waist. He bore a huge club in his hand, and his round owl eyes blinked fiercely upon the intruder. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, threatening Guff with his club. "I've come to see the first and foremost Phanphasm of Fantastico," replied the general, who did not like the way this creature looked at him, but still was not afraid. "Ah, you shall see him," said the man with a sneering laugh. "First and foremost shall decide upon the best way to punish you." "Oh, he will not punish me," returned Guff calmly, "for I have come here to do him and his people a rare favor. Lead on, fellow, and take me directly to your master." The owl man raised his club with a threatening gesture. "If you try to escape," he said, "beware." But here the general interrupted him. "Spare your threats," said he, "and do not be impertinent, or I will have you severely punished. Lead on and keep silent." This Guff was really a clever rascal, and it seems a pity he was so bad, for in a good cause he might have accomplished much. He realized that he had put himself into a dangerous position by coming to this dreadful mountain, but he also knew that if he showed fear, he was lost. So he adopted a bold manner as his best defense. The wisdom of his plan was soon evident, for the phantasm with the owl's head turned and led the way up the mountain. At the very top was a level plain upon which were heaps of rocks that at first glance seemed solid. But on looking closer, Guff discovered that these rock heaps were dwellings, for each had an opening. Not a person was to be seen outside the rock huts. All was silent. The owl man led the way amongst the groups of dwellings to one standing in the center. It seemed no better and no worse than any of the others. Outside the entrance to this rock heap, the guide gave a low wail that sounded like "Lee-wah." Suddenly there bounded from the opening another hairy man. This one wore the head of a bear. In his hand he bore a brass hoop. He glared at the stranger in evident surprise. "Why have you captured this foolish wanderer and brought him here?" he demanded, addressing the owl man. "I did not capture him," was the answer. "He passed the scarlet alligator and came here of his own free will and accord." The first and foremost looked at the general. "Have you tired of your life, then?" he asked. "No, indeed," answered Guff. "I am a gnome, and the chief general of King Rokat the Red's great army of gnomes. I come of a long-lived race, and I may say that I expect to live a long time yet. Sit down, you phantasms, if you can find a seat in this wild haunt, and listen to what I have to say." With all his knowledge and bravery, General Guff did not know that the steady glare from the bear eyes were reading his inmost thoughts as surely as if they had been put into words. He did not know that these despised rock heaps of phantasms were nearly deceptions to their own eyes, nor could he guess that he was standing in the midst of one of the most splendid and luxurious cities ever built by magic power. All that he saw was a barren waste of rock heaps, a hairy man with an owl's head, and another with a bear's head. The sorcery of the phantasms permitted him to see no more. Suddenly, the first and foremost swung his brass hoop and caught Guff round the neck with it. The next instant, before the general could think of what had happened to him, he was dragged inside the rock hut. Here, his eyes still blinded to realities, he perceived only a dim light by which the hut seemed as rough and rude inside as it was outside. Yet he had a strange feeling that many bright eyes were fastened upon him, and that he stood in a vast and extensive hall. The first and foremost now laughed grimly and released his prisoner. "If you have anything to say that is interesting," he remarked, "speak out before I strangle you." So Guff spoke out. He tried not to pay attention to a strange rustling sound that he heard, as of an unseen multitude drawing near to listen to his words. His eyes could only see the fierce bear man, and to him he addressed his speech. First, he told of his plan to conquer the land of Oz, and plunder the country of its riches and enslave its people, who, being fairies, could not be killed. After relating all this and telling of the tunnels the Gnome King was building, he said he had come to ask the first and foremost to join the gnomes with his band of terrible warriors and help them to defeat the Oz people. The general spoke very earnestly and impressively, but when he had finished, the bear man began to laugh as if much amused, and his laughter seemed to be echoed by a chorus of merriment from an unseen multitude. Then, for the first time, Guff began to feel a trifle worried. "Who else has promised to help you?" finally asked the first and foremost. "The Whimsies," replied the general. Again the bare-headed phantasm laughed. "Any others?" he inquired. "Only the growlywogs," said Guff. This answer set the first and foremost laughing anew. "What share of the spoils am I to have?" was the next question. "Anything you like, except King Rocat's magic belt," replied Guff. At this, the phantasm set up a roar of laughter, which had its echo in the unseen chorus, and the bear man seemed so amused that he actually rolled upon the ground and shouted with merriment. "Oh, these blind and foolish gnomes," he said, "how big they seem to themselves, and how small they really are." Suddenly he arose and seized Guff's neck with one hairy paw, dragging him out of the hut into the open. Here he gave a curious wailing cry, and, as if in answer, from all the rocky huts on the mountain top came flocking a horde of phantasms, all with hairy bodies, but wearing heads of various animals, birds, and reptiles. All were ferocious and repulsive-looking to the deceived eyes of the gnome, and Guff could not repress a shudder of disgust as he looked upon them. First and foremost, slowly raised his arms, and in a twinkling his hairy skin fell from him, and he appeared before the astonished gnomes as a beautiful woman, clothed in a flowing gown of pink gauze. In her dark hair flowers were entwined, and her face was noble and calm. At the same instant, the entire band of phantasms was transformed into a pack of howling wolves, running here and there as they snarled and showed their ugly yellow fangs. The woman now raised her arms, even as the man-bear had done, and in a twinkling the wolves became crawling lizards, while she herself changed into a huge butterfly. Guff had only time to cry out in fear and take a step backward to avoid the lizards when another transformation occurred, and all returned instantly to the form they had originally worn. Then the first and foremost, who had resumed his hairy body and bare head, turned to the gnome and asked, "Do you still demand our assistance?" "More than ever," answered the general firmly. "Tell me, then, what can you offer the phantasms that they have not already?" required the first and foremost. Guff hesitated. He really did not know what to say. The gnome's king vaunted magic belt seemed a poor thing compared to the astonishing magical powers of these people. Gold, jewels, and slaves they might secure in any quantity without a special effort. He felt that he was dealing with powers greatly beyond him. There was but one argument that might influence the phantasms, who were creatures of evil. "Permit me to call your attention to the exquisite joy of making the happy unhappy," said he at last. "Conquer the pleasure of destroying innocent and harmless people." "Ah, you have answered me," cried the first and foremost. "For that reason alone we will aid you. Go home and tell your bandy-legged king that as soon as his tunnel is finished, phantasms will be with him, and lead his legions to the conquest of Oz. The deadly desert alone has kept us from destroying Oz long ago, and your underground tunnel is a clever thing. Go home and prepare for our coming." Guff was very glad to be permitted to go with this promise. The owl man led him back down the mountain path and ordered the scarlet alligator to crawl away and allow the gnome to cross the bridge in safety. After the visitor had gone, a brilliant and gorgeous city appeared upon the mountain top, clearly visible to the eyes of the gaily dressed multitude of phantasms that lived there. The first and foremost, beautifully arrayed, addressed the others in these words: "It is time we went into the world and brought sorrow and dismay to its people. Too long have we remained by ourselves upon this mountain top. For while we are thus secluded, many nations have grown happy and prosperous, and the chief joy of the race of the phantasm is to destroy happiness. So I think it is lucky that this messenger from the gnomes arrived among us just now, to remind us that the opportunity has come for us to make trouble. We will use King Rocat's tunnel to conquer the land of Oz. Then we will destroy the Whimsies, the Growlywogs, and the Gnomes, and afterwards go out to ravage and annoy and grieve the whole world." The multitude of evil phantasms eagerly applauded this plan, which they fully approved. I am told that the herbs are the most powerful and merciless of all the evil spirits, and the phantasms of Fantastico belong to the race of herbs. Yes, sorry, we are running late today. We have 3 more chapters. Chapter 12. How They Matched the Fuddles. Dorothy and her fellow travelers rode away from the Cuttenclip village and followed the indistinct path as far as the signpost. Here they took the main road again and proceeded pleasantly through the pretty farming country. When evening came and they stopped at a dwelling and were joyfully welcomed and given plenty to eat and good beds for the night. Early next morning, however, they were up and eager to start, and after a good breakfast they bade their host good-bye and climbed into the red wagon to which the sawhorse had been hitched all night. Being made of wood, this horse never got tired, nor cared to lie down. Dorothy was not quite sure whether he ever slept or not, but it was certain that he never did when anybody was around. The weather is always beautiful in Oz, and this morning the air was cool and refreshing and the sunshine brilliant and delightful. In about an hour they came to the place where another road branched off. There was a signpost here which read, "This way to Fuddlecumjig." "Oh, here is where we turn," said Dorothy, observing the sign. "What? Are we going to the Fuddlecumjig?" asked Captain General. "Yes, Ozma thought we might enjoy the Fuddles. They are said to be very interesting," she replied. "No one would suspect it from their name," said Aunt Em. "Who are they, anyhow? More paper dolls?" "I think not," answered Dorothy, laughing. "But I can't say exactly, Aunt Em, what they are. We'll find out when we get there." "Perhaps the wizard knows," replied Uncle Henry. "No, I've never been there before," said the wizard, "but I've often heard of Fuddlecumjig and the Fuddles, who are said to be the most peculiar people in all the land of Oz." "In what way?" asked the Shaggy Man. "I don't know, I'm sure," said the wizard. Just then, as they rode along the pretty green lane toward the Fuddlecumjig, they espied a kangaroo sitting by the roadside. The poor animal had its face covered with both its front paws and was crying so bitterly that the tears coursed down its cheeks in 2 tiny streaks and trickled across the road where they formed a pool in a small hollow. The sawhorse stopped short at this pitiful sight, and Dorothy cried out with ready sympathy, "What's the matter, kangaroo?" wailed the kangaroo. "I've lost my..." "Poor thing," said the wizard. "She lost her mister. It's probably her husband, and she's dead." "No," sobbed the kangaroo. It isn't that. I've lost my "I know," said the Shaggy Man. "She lost her mirror." "No, it's said the kangaroo, and cried harder than ever. "It must be her mince pie," suggested Aunt Em. "Or her milk toast," proposed Uncle Henry. "I've lost my mittens," said the kangaroo, getting it out at last. "Oh!" cried the yellow hen with a cackle of relief. "Why didn't you say so before?" "I couldn't," said the kangaroo. "But see here," said Dorothy, "you don't need mittens in this warm weather." "Yes, indeed I do," replied the animal, stopping her sobs and removing her paw from her face to look at the little girl reproachfully. "My hands will get all sunburned and tanned without my mittens, and I've worn them so long that I'll probably catch cold without them." "Nonsense," said Dorothy. "I never heard of any kangaroos wearing mittens." "Didn't you?" asked the animal as if surprised. "Never," repeated the girl. "And you'll probably make yourself sick if you don't stop crying. Where do you live?" "About 2 miles from Fuddlecumjig," was the answer. "Grandmother Knit made me the mittens, and she's one of the Fuddles." "Well, you'd better go home now, and perhaps the old lady will make you another pair," suggested Dorothy. "We're on our way to Fuddlecumjig, and you may hop along beside us." So they rode along, and the kangaroo stopped beside the red wagon, hopped beside the red wagon, and seemed quickly to have forgotten her loss. By the by, the wizard said to the animal, "Are the Fuddles nice people?" "Oh, very nice," answered the kangaroo. "That is, when they're properly put together, but they get dreadfully scattered and mixed up at times, and then they can't do anything with them." "What do you mean by getting scattered?" asked Dorothy. "Why, they're made in a good many small pieces," explained the kangaroo, "and whenever any stranger comes near them, they have a habit of falling apart and scattering themselves around. That's when they get so dreadfully mixed, and it's a hard puzzle to put them together again." "Who usually puts them together?" asked Omby Amby. "Anyone who is able to match the pieces. I sometimes put Grandmother Knit together myself, because I know her so well, I can tell every piece that belongs to her. Then when she's all matched, she knits for me, and that's how she made my mittens. And it took a good many days hard knitting, and I had to put Grandmother together a good many times, because every time I came near her, she scattered herself." "I should think she would get used to your coming and not be afraid," said Dorothy. "It isn't that," replied the kangaroo. "They're not a bit afraid when they're put together, and usually they're very, very jolly and pleasant. It's just a habit they have to scatter themselves, and if they didn't do it, they wouldn't be Fuddles." The travelers thought upon this quite seriously for a time, while the sawhorse continued to carry them rapidly forwards. Then Aunt Em remarked, "I don't see much use our visiting these Fuddles. If we find them scattered, all we can do is to sweep 'em up and then go about our business." "Oh, I believe we've better go on," replied Dorothy. "I'm getting hungry, and we must try to get some luncheon at Fuddlecumjig. Perhaps the food won't be scattered as badly as the people." "You'll find plenty to eat there," declared the kangaroo, hopping along in big bounds because the sawhorse was going so fast. "And they have a fine cook, too, if you can manage to put him together. There's the town now, just ahead of us." They looked ahead and saw a group of very pretty houses standing in a green field and a little apart from the main road. "Some munchkins came here a few days ago and matched a lot of people together," said the kangaroo. "I think they're together yet, and if you go softly without making any noise, perhaps they won't scatter." "Let's try it," said the wizard. So they stopped the sawhorse and got out of the wagon, and after bidding good-bye to the kangaroo, who hopped away home, they entered the field and very cautiously approached the group of houses. So silently did they move that soon they saw through the windows of the houses people moving around, while others were passing to and fro in the yards between the buildings. They seemed much like other people from a distance, and apparently they did not notice the little party so quietly approaching. They had almost reached the nearest house when Toto saw a large beetle crossing the path and barked loudly at it. Instantly a wild clatter was heard from the houses and yards. Dorothy thought it sounded like a sudden hailstorm, and the visitors, knowing that caution was no longer necessary, hurried forward to see what had happened. After the clatter, an intense stillness reigned in the town. The strangers entered the first house they came to, which was also the largest, and found the floor strewn with pieces of the people who lived there. They looked much like fragments of wood neatly painted, and were of all sorts of curious and fantastic shapes, no two pieces being in any way alike. They picked up some of these pieces and looked at them carefully. On one, which Dorothy held, was an eye, which looked at her pleasantly, but with an interested expression, as if it wondered what she was going to do with it. Quite nearby, she discovered and picked up a nose, and by matching the two pieces together, found that they were part of a face. "If I could find the mouth," she said, "this Fuddle might be able to talk and tell us what to do next." "Then let's find it," replied the wizard, and so all got down on their hands and knees and began examining the scattered pieces. "Ah, found it!" cried the shaggy man, and ran to Dorothy with a queer-shaped piece that had a mouth on it, but when they tried to fit it to the eye and nose, they found the parts wouldn't match together. "That mouth belongs to another person," said Dorothy. "You see, we need a curve here and a point there to make it fit the face." "Well, it must be here someplace," declared the wizard, "so if we search long enough, we shall find it." Dorothy fitted an ear on next, and the ear had a little patch of red hair above it. So, while the others were searching for the mouth, she hunted for pieces with red hair, and found several of them, which, when matched to the other pieces, formed the top of a man's head. She had also found the other eye and the ear, by the time Omby-Amby in a far corner discovered the mouth. When the face was thus completed, all the parts joined together with a nicety that was astonishing. "Why, it's like a picture puzzle!" exclaimed the little girl. "Let's find the rest of him and get 'em all together." "What's the rest of him like?" asked the wizard. "Here are some pieces of blue legs and green arms, but I don't know whether they are his or not." "Look for a white shirt and a white apron," said the head, which had been put together, speaking in a rather faint voice. "I'm the cook." "Oh, thank you," said Dorothy. "It's very lucky we started you first, for I'm hungry, and you can be cooking something for us to eat while we match the other folks together." It was not very difficult, now that they had a hint as to how the man was dressed, to find the other pieces belonging to him, and as all of them now worked on the cook, trying piece after piece to see if it would fit, they finally had the cook set up complete. When he was finished, he made them a low bow and said, "I will go at once to the kitchen to prepare your dinner. You will find it something of a job to get all the fuddles together, so I advise you to begin on the Lord High Chigglewitz, whose first name is Larry. He's a bald-headed fat man, and is dressed in a blue coat with brass buttons, a pink vest, and drab breeches. A piece of his left knee is missing, having been lost years ago when he scattered himself too carelessly. That makes him limp a little, but he gets along very well with half a knee. As he is the chief personage in this town of Fiddlecumjig, he will be able to welcome you and assist you with the others, so it will be best to work on him while I'm getting your dinner." "We will," said the wizard. "Thank you very much, cook, for the suggestion." Aunt Em was the first to discover a piece of the Lord High Chigglewitz. "Seems to me like a fool business, this matching folks together," she remarked. "But as we haven't anything to do till dinner's ready, we may as well get rid of some of this rubbish. Here, Henry, get busy and look for Larry's bald head. I've got his pink vest all right." They worked with eager interest, and Billina provided a great help to them. The yellow hen had sharp eyes and could put her head close to the various pieces that lay scattered about. She would examine the Lord High Chigglewitz and see which piece of him was next needed, and then hunt around until she found it. So before an hour had passed, old Larry was standing complete before them. "I congratulate you, my friends," he said, speaking in a cheerful voice. "You are certainly the cleverest people who ever visited us. I was never matched together so quickly in my life. I'm considered a great puzzle, usually." "Well," said Dorothy, "it used to be a picture puzzle craze in Kansas, and so I've had some experience matching puzzles. But the pictures were flat while you were all round, and that makes you harder to figure out." "Oh, thank you, my dear," replied old Larry, greatly pleased. "I feel highly complimented. Were I not a really good puzzle, there would be no object in my scattering myself." "Why do you do it?" asked Aunt Em severely. "Why don't you behave yourself and stay put together?" The Lord High Chigglewitz seemed annoyed by this speech, but he replied politely, "Madam, you have perhaps noticed that every person has some peculiarity. Mine is to scatter myself. What your own peculiarity is, I will not venture to say, but I shall never find fault with you, whatever you do." "Now you've got your diploma, Em," said Uncle Henry with a laugh, "and I'm glad of it. It's a queer country, and we may as well take people as we find them." "If we did, we'd leave these folks scattered," she returned, and this retort made everybody laugh good-naturedly. Just then Omby-Amby found a hand with a knitting needle in it, and they decided to put Grandmother Knit together. She proved an easier puzzle than old Larry, and when she was completed, they found her a pleasant old lady who welcomed them cordially. Dorothy told her how the kangaroo had lost her mittens, and Grandmother Knit promised to set to work at once and make the poor animal another pair. Then the cook came to call them to dinner, and they found an inviting meal prepared for them. The Lord High Chigglewitz sat at the head of the table, and Grandmother Knit at the foot, and the guests had a merry time and thoroughly enjoyed themselves. After dinner, they went into the yard and matched several other people together, and this work was so interesting that they might have spent the entire day at Fuddlecumjig had not the wizard suggested that they resume their journey. "But I don't like to leave all these poor people scattered," said Dorothy, undecided what to do. "Oh, don't mind us, my dear," returned old Larry. "Every day or so some of the Gillikins or Munchkins or Winkies come here to amuse themselves by matching us together, so there will be no harm in leaving these pieces where they are for a time. But I hope you will visit us again, and if you do, you will always be welcome, I assure you." "Don't you ever match each other?" she inquired. "Never, for we are no puzzles to ourselves, and so there wouldn't be any fun in it." They now said goodbye to the queer Fuddles and got into their wagon to continue their journey. "Those are certainly strange people," remarked Aunt Em thoughtfully as they drove away from Fuddlecumjig. "But I really can't see what use they are at all." "Why, they amused us all for several hours," replied the wizard. "That is being of use to us, I'm sure." "I think they're more fun than playing solitaire or mumblety-peg," declared Uncle Henry soberly. "For my part, I'm glad we visited the Fuddles." Chapter 13. How the General Talked to the King. When General Guff returned to the cavern of the Gnome King, His Majesty asked, "Well, what luck? Will the Whimsies join us?" "They will," answered the General. "They will fight for us with all their strength and cunning." "Good!" exclaimed the king. "What reward did you promise them?" "Your Majesty is to use the magic belt to give each whimsy a large fine head in place of the small one he is now obliged to wear." "I agree to that," said the king. "This is good news, Guff, and it makes me feel more certain of the conquest of Oz." "But I have other news for you," announced the general. "Good or bad?" "Good, Your Majesty." "Then I will hear it," said the king with interest. "Growlywogs will join us." "No!" cried the astonished king. "Yes, indeed," said the general. "I have their promise." "What reward do they demand?" inquired the king suspiciously, for he knew how greedy the Growlywogs were. "They are to take a few of the Oz people for their slaves," replied Guff. He did not think it necessary to tell Roquat that the Growlywogs demanded 20,000 slaves. It would be time enough for that when Oz was conquered. "A very reasonable request, I'm sure," remarked the king. "I must congratulate you, Guff, upon the wonderful success of your journey." "But that's not all," said the general proudly. The king seemed astonished. "Speak out, sir," he commanded. "I have seen the first and foremost Phanfasm of the Mountain of Fantastico, and he will bring his people to assist us." "What?" cried the king. "The Phanfasms! You don't mean it, Guff!" "It is true," declared the general proudly. The king became thoughtful, and his brows wrinkled. "I'm afraid, Guff," he said rather anxiously, "that the first and foremost may prove as dangerous to us as to the Oz people. If he and his terrible band come down from the mountain, they may take the notion to conquer the gnomes." "Puh! That is a foolish idea," retorted Guff irritably, but he knew in his heart that the king was right. "The first and foremost is a particular friend of mine, and will do us no harm. Why, when I was there, he even invited me into his house." The general neglected to tell the king how he had been jerked into the hut of the first and foremost by means of the brass hoop. So Roquat the Red looked at his general admiringly and said, "You are a wonderful gnome, Guff. I'm sorry I did not make you my general before. But what reward did the first and foremost demand?" "Nothing at all," answered the Guff. "Even the magic belt itself could not add to his powers of sorcery. All the Phanfasm's wish is to destroy the Oz people, who are good and happy.
This pleasure will amply repay them for assisting us." "When will they come?" asked Rocotte half fearfully. "When the tunnel is completed," said the general. "We are nearly halfway under the desert now," announced the king, "and that is fast work, because the tunnel has to be drilled through solid rock. But after we have passed the desert, it will not take us long to extend the tunnel to the walls of the Emerald City." "Well, whenever you are ready, we shall be joined by the Whimsies, the Growlywogs, and the Phanphasms," said Golf. "So the conquest of Oz is assured without a doubt." Again the king seemed thoughtful. "I'm almost sorry we did not undertake the conquest alone," he said. "All of these allies are dangerous people, and they may demand more than you have promised them. It might have been better to have conquered Oz without any assistance." "We could not do it," said the general positively. "Why not, Guff?" "You know very well. You have had one experience with the Oz people, and they defeated you." "That was because they rolled eggs at us," replied the king with a shudder. "My gnomes cannot stand eggs any more than I can myself. They are poison to all who live underground." "That is true enough," replied Guff. "But we might have taken the Oz people by surprise and conquered them before they had a chance to get any eggs. Our former defeat was due to the fact that the girl Dorothy had a yellow hen with her. I do not know what ever became of that hen, but I believe there are no hens at all in the land of Oz, and so there could be no eggs there. Oh, there are so many chickens there." "On the contrary," said Guff, "there are now hundreds of chickens in Oz, and they lay heaps of those dangerous eggs. I met a Goshawk on my way home, and the bird informed me that he had lately been to Oz to capture and devour some of the young chickens. They are protected by magic, so the hawk did not get a single one of them." "That is a very bad report," said the king nervously. "Very bad indeed. My gnomes are willing to fight, but they simply can't face hens' eggs, and I don't blame them." "They won't need to face them," replied Guff. "I'm afraid of eggs myself, and don't propose to take any chances of being poisoned by them. My plan is to send the Whimsies through the tunnel first, and then the Growlywogs and the Phanphasms. By the time we gnomes get there, the eggs will all be used up, and we may then pursue and capture the inhabitants at our leisure." "Perhaps you're right," returned the king with a dismal sigh. "But I want it distinctly understood that I claim Ozma and Dorothy as my own prisoners. They are rather nice girls, and I do not intend to let any of those dreadful creatures hurt them or make them their slaves. When I have captured them, I will bring them here and transform them into china ornaments to stand on my mantle. They will look very pretty, Dorothy on one end of the mantle and Ozma on the other, and I shall take great care to see they are not broken when the maids dust them." "Very well, your majesty. Do what you will with the girls for all I care. Now that our plans are arranged, and we have the 3 most powerful bands of evil spirits in the world to assist us, let us make haste to get the tunnel finished as soon as possible." "It will be ready in 3 days, promised the king, and he hurried away to inspect the work and see that the gnomes kept busy. All right, and now we're on our last chapter, chapter 14, How the Wizard Practiced Sorcery. "Who's next?" asked the wizard when they had left the town of Fiddlecumjig and the sawhorses started back along the road. "Why, Ozma laid out this trip," replied Dorothy, "and she advised me to see the rigmaroles next, and then visit the Tin Woodman." "That sounds good," said the wizard. "But what road do we take to get to the rigmaroles?" "I don't know exactly," returned the little girl, "but it must be somewhere just southwest from here." "Then why need we go way back to the crossroads?" asked the Shaggy Man. "We might save a lot of time by branching off here." "There isn't any path," asserted Uncle Henry. "Then we'd better go back to the signposts and make sure of our way," decided Dorothy. But after they had gone a short distance farther, the seahorse, who had overheard their conversation, stopped and said, "Here's a path."
Sure enough, a dim path seemed to branch off from the road they were on, and it led across pretty green meadows and past leafy groves, straight towards the southwest. "It looks like a good path," said Omby Amby. "Why not try it?" "All right," said Dorothy. "I'm anxious to see what the rigmaroles are like, and this path ought to take us there the quickest way." No one made any objections to this plan, so the Sawhorse turned into the path, which proved to be nearly as good as the one they had taken to get to the Fuddles. At first they passed a few retired farmhouses, but soon their scattered dwellings were left behind, and only the meadows and the trees were before them. But they rode along in cheerful contentment, and Aunt Em got into an argument with Billina about the proper way to raise chickens. "I don't care to contradict you," said the Yellow Hen with dignity, "but I have an idea I know more about chickens than human beings do." "Pshaw!" replied Aunt Em. "I've raised chickens for nearly 40 years, Billina, and I know you've got to starve 'em to make 'em lay lots of eggs, and stuff 'em if you want good broilers." "Broilers!" exclaimed Billina in horror. "Broil my chickens? Why, that's what they're there for, aren't they?" asked Aunt Em, astonished. "No, Aunt Em, not in Oz," said Dorothy. "People do not eat chickens here. You see, Billina was the first hen that was ever seen in this country, and I brought her here myself. Everybody liked her and respected her, so the Oz people wouldn't any more eat her chickens than they would eat Billina." "Well, I declare," Aunt Em asked. "How about the eggs?" "Oh, if we have more eggs than we want to hatch, we allow people to eat 'em," said Billina. "Indeed, I am very glad the Oz folks like our eggs, for otherwise they would spoil." "This certainly is a queer country," sighed Aunt Em. "Excuse me," called the Sawhorse. "The path is ended, and I'd like to know which way to go." They looked around, and sure enough, there was no path to be seen. "Well," said Dorothy, "we're going southwest, and it seems just as easy to follow that direction without a path as with one." "Certainly," answered the Sawhorse. "It is not hard to draw the wagon over the meadow. I only want to know where to go." "There's a forest over there across the prairie," said the Wizard, "and it lies in the direction we are going. Make straight for the forest, Sawhorse, and you're bound to go right." So the wooden animal trotted on again, and the meadow grass was so soft under the wheels that it made easy riding. But Dorothy was a little uneasy at losing the path, because now there was nothing to guide them. No houses were to be seen at all, so they could not ask their way of any farmer, and although the land of Oz was always beautiful, wherever one might go, this part of the country was strange to all the party. "Perhaps we're lost," suggested Aunt Em, after they had proceeded quite a way in silence. "Never mind," said the Shaggy Man. "I've been lost many a time, and so has Dorothy, and we've always been found again." "But we may get hungry," remarked Omby Amby. "That is the worst of getting lost in a place where there are no houses near." "We had a good dinner at the Fuddletown," said Uncle Henry, "and that will keep us from starving to death for a long time." "No one ever starved to death in Oz," declared Dorothy positively. "But people may get pretty hungry sometimes." The Wizard said nothing, and he did not seem especially anxious. The Sawhorse was trotting along briskly, but yet the forest seemed farther away than they had thought when they had first saw it. So it was nearly sundown when they finally came to the trees. But now they found themselves in a most beautiful spot, the wide-spreading trees being covered with flowering vines and having soft mosses underneath them. "This will be a good place to camp," said the Wizard as the Sawhorse stopped for further instructions. "Camp?" they all echoed. "Certainly," asserted the Wizard. "It will be dark before very long, and we cannot travel through this forest at night. So let us make up a camp here and have some supper and sleep until daylight comes again." They all looked at the little man in astonishment, and Aunt Em said with a sniff, "A pretty camp we'll have, I must say. I suppose you intend us to sleep under the wagon?" "And chew grass for our supper," added the Shaggy Man, laughing. But Dorothy seemed to have no doubts, and was quite cheerful. "It's lucky we have the wonderful wizard with us," she said, "because he can do most anything he wants to." "Oh, yes, I forgot we had the wizard," said Uncle Henry, looking at the little man curiously. "I didn't," chirped Billina contentedly. The wizard smiled and climbed out of the wagon, and all the others followed him. "In order to camp," said he, "the first thing we need is tents. Will someone please lend me a handkerchief?" The Shaggy Man offered him one, and Aunt Em another. He took them both and laid them carefully upon the grass near to the edge of the forest. Then he laid his own handkerchief down, too, and standing a little back from them, he waved his left hand toward the handkerchiefs and said, "Tents of canvas white as snow, let me see how fast you grow." Then, lo and behold, the handkerchiefs became tiny tents, and as the travelers looked at them, the tents grew bigger and bigger until in a few minutes each one was large enough to contain the entire party. "This," said the wizard, pointing to the first tent, "is for the accommodations of the ladies. Dorothy, you and your Aunt Em may step inside and take off your things." Everyone ran to look inside the tent, and they saw two pretty white beds, all ready for Dorothy and Aunt Em, and a silver roost for Billina. Rugs were spread upon the grassy floor, and some camp chairs and a table completed the furniture. "Well, well, well, this beats anything I ever saw or heard of," exclaimed Aunt Em, and she glanced at the wizard almost fearfully, as if he might be dangerous because of his great powers. "Oh, Mr. Wizard, how did you manage to do it?" asked Dorothy. "It's a trick Glinda the Sorceress taught me, and it is much better magic than I used to practice in Omaha or when I first came to Oz," he answered. "When the good Glinda found I was to live in the Emerald City always, she promised to help me, because she said the Wizard of Oz really ought to be a clever wizard, not a humbug. So we have been much together, and I am learning so fast that I expect to be able to accomplish some really wonderful things in time." "You've done it now," declared Dorothy. "These tents are just wonderful." "But come and see the men's tent," said the wizard. So they went to the second tent, which had shaggy edges because it had been made from the Shaggy Man's handkerchief, and found that completely furnished also. It contained 4 neat beds for Uncle Henry, Omby Amby, the Shaggy Man, and the wizard. Also, there was a soft rug for Toto to lie upon. "The third tent," explained the wizard, "is our dining room and kitchen." They visited the next and found a table and dishes in the dining tent, with plenty of those things necessary to use in cooking. The wizard carried out a big kettle and set it swinging on a crossbar before the tent. While he was doing this, Omby Amby and the Shaggy Man brought a supply of twigs from the forest, and then they built a fire underneath the kettle. "Now, Dorothy," said the wizard, smiling, "I expect you to cook our supper." "But there's nothing in the kettle," she cried. "Are you sure?" inquired the wizard. "I didn't see anything put in, and I'm almost sure it was empty when you brought it out," she replied. "Nevertheless," said the little man, winking slyly at Uncle Henry, "you will do well to watch our supper, my dear, and see that it doesn't boil over." Then the men took some pails and went into the forest to search for a spring of water, and while they were gone, Aunt Em said to Dorothy, "I believe the wizard is fooling us. I saw the kettle myself, and when he hung it over the fire, there wasn't a thing in it but air." "Don't worry," remarked Billina confidently as she nestled in the grass before the fire. "You'll find something in the kettle when it's taken off, and it won't be poor innocent chickens either." "Your hen has very bad manners," said Dorothy, said Aunt Em, looking somewhat disdainfully at Billina. "It seems too bad she ever learned how to talk." There might have been another unpleasant quarrel between Aunt Em and Billina had not the men returned just then with their pails filled with clear, sparkling water. The wizard told Dorothy that she was a good cook, and he believed their supper was ready. So Uncle Henry lifted the kettle from the fire and poured its contents into a big platter which the wizard held for him. The platter was fairly heaped with fine stew, smoking hot, with many kinds of vegetables and dumplings, and a rich, delicious gravy. The wizard triumphantly placed the platter upon the table in a dining tent, and then they all sat down in camp chairs to the feast. There were several other dishes on the table, all carefully covered, and when the time came to remove these covers, they found bread and butter, cakes, cheese, pickles, and fruit, including some of the luscious strawberries of Oz. No one ventured to ask a question as to how these things came there. They contented themselves by eating heartily the good things provided, and Toto and Billina had their full share, you may be sure. Oh, hang on. After the meal was over, Aunt Anne whispered to Dorothy, "That may have been magic food, my dear, and for that reason, perhaps it won't be very nourishing, but I'm willing to say it tasted as good as anything I ever ate." Then she added in a louder voice, "Who's going to do the dishes?" "No one, madam," answered the wizard. "The dishes have done themselves." "Law sakes!" ejaculated the good lady, holding up her hands in amazement. For sure enough, when she looked at the dishes, they had a moment before left upon the table. She found them all washed and dried and piled up into neat stacks. All right, so we have come to the end of our story time, and looking at the clock, I realized that we could have done this in 3 full story times, but I was unsure how long it would take. But yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and end the stream here. Oh, let me get Meister back up there. There we go. So I'm gonna go ahead and end the stream here, and let's find somebody to raid. See, I think Polly Swags is streaming. Night Corral. Oh, I hope you got some good sleep last night, and I hope you get good sleep tonight. Yeah. Oh, thanks so much for hanging out with me. Everybody who came here, Regent, Bafiki, Shaltier, Corral, of course. Was there anybody else? Oh, it was Fairy, and Kicken was here. Kicken, I hope that you were able to get to sleep. Yeah, let's go ahead and read Polly Swags. Ooh. Yeah, there we go. Now that's spelled correctly. Alright, and it is Story Raid. Oops, that's not what I meant. Doing the little Story Raid come on. Yeah. All right. Well, I'll see you next time. Next stream is going to be tomorrow, and we're going to be continuing with Picture of Dorian Gray. So thanks again. I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Bye.